Inside the apartment, under the dim light, the entwined figures of the two flickered in and out of sight. Percival leaned down, his expression tender, eyes filled with affection. In the ambiguous glow, the woman's graceful figure swayed, her soft gasps filling the air. Ethel. Percival's kiss carried the scent of alcohol. With closed eyes, he couldn't help but whisper softly. In an instant, Cornelia's body stiffened, her mind went blank. And the warmth born from their earlier intimacy gradually faded away. Looking at the man on top of her, Cornelia knew that Percival was seeing another woman through her. Ethel, Percival's first love, who died in a car accident 3 years ago. And she just happened to have a face somewhat resembling Ethel's. At this thought, Cornelia felt a pang in her chest. Suppressing the faint ache in her heart, she rose and pinned Percival beneath her. Percival's expression darkened instantly as he opened his eyes, his drunkenness fading away. With a somber gaze, he pulled Cornelia up, his voice turning icy. "Did I allow you to move?" Cornelia froze, staring at Percival. Compared to his earlier tenderness, his gaze now felt piercingly cold. She bit her lip, her heart filled with bitterness. Cornelia raised her head to look at Percival, her eyes reddening slightly, yet she stubbornly said, "Why can't I move? Is it because she can't?" The man frowned and coldly interrupted her. "Shut up." Percival darkened his face, withdrew his body, stood up, and buttoned his shirt. He looked down at her, not a trace of tenderness left in his eyes. "Cornelia, 3 years have passed, and you still haven't learned her obedience." Hearing this, Cornelia held her breath, her voice muffled and strained. "Why should I imitate her? The joy she couldn't give you, I can." Percival, his gaze instantly turned sharp, his tone icy. "Don't forget why I brought you back. Do you think you're worthy of being compared to her?" As the words fell, Percival turned and left the room. In the empty, dimly lit room, only Cornelia remained alone. Her original stubbornness collapsed in an instant as she slumped onto the bed, unable to hold back her tears any longer. Sterling Family Group press conference. On the stage, Percival stood in a well-tailored suit, dazzling under the bright lights. Just as he had appeared when she first saw him 3 years ago, Cornelia gazed at Percival, a bitter feeling welling up in her heart. After their unpleasant parting that night, Percival never came to see Cornelia again. She knew Percival was doing it on purpose. She crossed his bottom line. Percival never allowed Cornelia to mention Ethel in his presence. At this thought, Cornelia lowered her gaze, a flash of pain in her eyes, despite her 3 years of companionship with him on stage. Percival always maintained an aloof demeanor. When their eyes met, it was as if they were strangers. Cornelia looked down at the press release in her hands, her throat tightening. The reporter's voice echoed through the press conference once more, disrupting Cornelia's emotions. "Mr. Percival, we've heard about the tragic loss of your beloved 3 years ago. Now that your career is thriving, have you considered finding a new president's wife for the Sterling Family Group?" Cornelia startled at the words, lifting her gaze to Percival, her eyes swirling with unspoken emotions. Her hands were damp with nervous sweat as she gazed at him, awaiting his response. Percival remained silent for a few seconds, his gaze cutting through the crowd before finally settling on Cornelia. The moment their eyes met, Cornelia felt her heart skip a beat. She clenched her hands tightly, a faint smile curling at the corners of her lips. The next second, Percival's deep voice echoed throughout the press conference. "The president's wife already has a suitable candidate." Upon hearing this, the venue instantly erupted in an uproar, with everyone whispering among themselves. Cornelia gazed at Percival with tender affection in her eyes slightly reddened, a glimmer of hope rising in her heart. Percival's response made Cornelia feel that after 3 years, she had finally warmed Percival's heart. Instantly, the crowd fell silent, all eyes turning curiously toward Percival. Percival looked calm and didn't seem inclined to pursue the matter further. Outside the press conference venue, after the reporters had dispersed, Percival slowly emerged from the venue. Suddenly, Cornelia stepped in front of Percival. Looking at the suddenly appearing Cornelia, Percival felt nothing but disgust in his heart. Percival glanced around with a gloomy expression, his face full of impatience. "What do you want?" Cornelia looked at the indifferent Percival before her, knowing he was still angry about that night's incident. Thinking of this, Cornelia felt uncomfortable, but still managed to force a faint smile, speaking softly. "Percival, I was wrong about what happened that day. I shouldn't have mentioned her in front of you. Please don't be angry anymore." Cornelia didn't want to dwell on that day's incident anymore, even though she cared deeply inside. But Cornelia thought that since Percival intended to marry her, they should just let bygones be bygones. Hearing Cornelia mention Ethel Percival again, an inexplicable anger rose in his heart, and he growled in a low voice, Is this what you called me here for? Percival looked disgusted, unwilling to engage further with Cornelia. If there's nothing else, don't come looking for me. With that said, Percival turned to leave. Cornelia blocked Percival's path, gazing at the indifferent Percival. Cornelia's eyes flickered with a trace of loneliness. Emotions churned endlessly in her eyes. Cornelia couldn't help but speak up. Percival, what did you mean by those words you just said at the press conference? Cornelia's tone was somewhat forceful, as if interrogating Percival. Looking at the Cornelia before him, apart from that face, there wasn't the slightest resemblance to Ethel. Percival felt even more agitated in his heart, impatiently pushing Cornelia away with a cold gaze. His face full of disgust. You know what I want, just do what you're supposed to do. With that, Percival left without looking back. Cornelia stood frozen in place, staring blankly at Percival's fading figure, her heart aching with bitterness. Percival's residence. Cornelia pushed open the door and walked through the corridor. This villa was Percival's private residence, and only when Percival wanted to see Cornelia would he summon her here. Since that interview ended, the two had never met again. Cornelia felt her palms grow damp with sweat. After all, this was the first time she had come without Percival's permission. But regarding Percival's words at the previous press conference, Cornelia hoped to get an answer. Did he truly intend to marry her? The villa's front door was slightly ajar, leaving a narrow gap. Cornelia had just pressed the door handle but hadn't pushed it open yet when she faintly heard a man's voice coming from inside. Percival, so you've really decided on the marriage alliance? As the words fell, Cornelia froze momentarily, her hand gripping the door handle, pausing mid-air. Marriage alliance. Cornelia, her hand trembled as she gripped the doorknob, then instantly withdrew it. Percival spoke in a low voice, and then the man's voice sounded again. Where is that woman? Cornelia, upon hearing this, her retreating footsteps abruptly halted. Her chest was pounding violently as she stood there, her eyelashes trembling. She wanted to hear Percival's answer. Percival let out a cold laugh, his gaze icy. The next second, a voice came from inside the room. Cornelia, I can toss her aside whenever I'm done playing. Cornelia froze, her heart sinking. Percival's words were like a sharp blade, scraping against Cornelia's heart, the pain leaving Cornelia breathless. So, Percival's statement at the press conference wasn't about her. At this thought, Cornelia felt a sting in her nose, and tears began to flow uncontrollably. To him, she was just a toy he could discard whenever he grew tired of playing. Cornelia couldn't bear to listen any longer and turned to run out the door. A servant passing by with tea bumped into Cornelia, startling her and causing her to instinctively call out, Miss Cornelia, you. Before the words were finished, Cornelia had already run far away. Inside the house, Percival heard the commotion and opened the door, his brow slightly furrowed. Who? The servant paused for a moment, then lowered their head and said, It's Miss Cornelia. Percival remained silent, his face dark as he stared in the direction where Cornelia had left, his expression somber. Inside the apartment, Cornelia slumped on the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks, the words of Percival echoing in her mind, her heart aching unbearably. Back then, when the Tennyson family went bankrupt and was drowning in debt, it was Percival who helped her repay it all. There was only one condition: let Cornelia stay by his side. Cornelia knew that Percival helped her only because her face resembled that person's, but Cornelia didn't care. She believed that as long as she could stay by Percival's side, Percival would eventually move on one day. Yet over these 3 years, Cornelia recalled all her interactions with Percival, realizing it had always been her unrequited affection. The door suddenly opened. Cornelia looked up, meeting Percival's deep gaze. Percival's expression remained indifferent, as if nothing had happened, his voice calm. Did you hear everything? Percival's casual remark made Cornelia's heart ache. With a grim expression, he slowly walked towards Cornelia. She looked at Percival, her voice trembling uncontrollably at the end. Percival, am I really just a dispensable plaything in your heart? Percival simply gazed calmly at Cornelia, his voice low. You're a smart woman. Must I keep reminding you why I keep you by my side? Cornelia fought back tears as she looked up at him. In your eyes, am I only worthy of being her shadow? Percival frowned and roughly grabbed Cornelia's hand. I told you not to mention her again. Can't you understand? Percival leaned down, trapping Cornelia in his embrace, his palms sliding upward with increasing force. Cornelia knew what Percival intended to do. She should have yielded to him, but instead, she froze, struggling desperately. Who was he really thinking of when he did these things? Cornelia trembled as she spoke. Percival, am I just a tool for you to vent your frustrations on? Percival clamped his hand tightly around her neck, his tone unyielding. Right. Don't forget, you're only by my side to keep me entertained. After speaking, Percival tore off Cornelia's clothes and pressed himself down upon her. Percival seemed to be venting his inner frustration. His movements beneath her erratic and violent as he unleashed his fury upon Cornelia's body. Cornelia felt only pain beneath her, and her heart ached as if torn apart. She bit her lip hard, struggling not to make a sound, her eyes brimming with tears. She no longer wanted to resist anything, just looked at the Percival before her and sobbed. Percival, do you really not have even a little love for me? Can't I be the only one by your side? Percival did not answer. Only buried his face in Cornelia's neck, sucking hard. Cornelia understood. She closed her eyes, tears falling, lying there quietly, letting Percival vent. In the bathroom, the sound of running water echoed through the night. Cornelia sat dazedly on the bed, her entire body still aching. Suddenly, Percival's phone lit up. Cornelia glanced over. It was a text message, just one look, and it felt as if a sharp blade had pierced her heart once more. Percival, I miss you so much. I can finally marry you. In an instant, Cornelia's heart sank again, as if plunging to the bottom of a lake in that moment, chilling to the bone. The pain beneath her still hadn't faded, thinking about everything that had just happened with Percival. At this moment, Cornelia felt even more how ridiculous she was. Cornelia turned her head away, not even wanting to look at those words anymore. She bit her lip tightly, her hands gripping a corner of the bedding fiercely. A long moment passed. The sound of water in the bathroom suddenly stopped. Percival walked straight past Cornelia without even glancing at Cornelia. Seeing Percival approach, Cornelia pointed to the message on her phone. Her voice was slightly hoarse. What exactly do you take me for? Are you choosing her or me? Percival said with a dark expression, his voice low. Do you think you're a match for her? In an instant, Cornelia felt a sharp pang in her heart, overwhelmed with bitterness. Cornelia bit her lip. Her voice calm. Fine, I'm not worthy. Since you're getting married, just let me go. Cornelia forced down the sorrow in her heart. What I owe you, I'll repay slowly. After all, I've been with you for 3 years, long enough. Hearing this, Percival grew even angrier. Staring at Cornelia, his voice turned icy. You've just slept with me for 3 years. Do you really think you're worth that much? After saying this, Percival cast a look of disgust at Cornelia and turned to leave. Cornelia sat motionless on the bed, clutching a corner of the blanket tightly, staring at Percival's lingering marks on her body, sobbing. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Percival's words were like sharp knives, ruthlessly stabbing into Cornelia's heart. The pain left her breathless, plunging her into endless despair. Trevor Family Group engagement banquet. The scene was crowded with many reporters. Cornelia was among them. Because they received news that today the Trevor Family Group would officially announce an important message. Under the bright lights, Trevor Family Group's eldest daughter Billy wore a beautiful red dress, graceful in demeanor, with a smiling face and a gentle voice. Welcome, everyone. The announcement I'm about to make today is something you've probably already heard whispers about. That I and Percival are soon to be married. In an instant, Cornelia felt as if her heart had stopped, her breath growing slightly rapid. The room erupted in excitement. It turned out the Sterling family's conglomerate was to be united in marriage with the eldest daughter of the Trevor family's corporation. Then on the stage, that familiar figure appeared once again before Cornelia's eyes, dressed in a sleek suit. Percival walked towards Billy with a gentle expression, his voice tender. Everyone. This is the future president's wife of Sterling Family Group. Billy. As he spoke, Percival gently wrapped his arm around Billy's waist. Witnessing this scene before her, Cornelia's heart sank violently, a sour bitterness flooding her chest as if pierced by a sharp blade. Although this matter Cornelia had long been aware of, even before learning about the interview with the Trevor family's conglomerate, she could faintly guess whether it might be related to Percival. But when Percival truly appeared before her eyes, standing side by side with another woman to announce their marital alliance, Cornelia found it utterly unbearable. Percival cast Cornelia a cold glance, and Cornelia knew Percival had seen her. But Percival didn't spare Cornelia another glance, his expression remaining indifferent. The audience erupted in excitement as reporters scrambled to get interviews. Cornelia glanced at the manuscript in her hand, her throat feeling as if it were blocked. Her heart aching with bitterness, she couldn't bring herself to interview or even look directly at Percival and another woman's happiness. Cornelia's eyes reddened, her nose tingling with bitterness. She quietly watched Percival, watching the two on stage. Cornelia felt like a complete clown. Cornelia kept her head deeply bowed, not even wanting to glance at the pair on stage anymore. My heart is filled with bitterness, aching with sorrow," before Cornelia could even regain her composure. A man's voice cut through the clamor of the scene. "Mr. Percival, we've uncovered information that you've been keeping a mistress outside. Can you confirm whether this is true?" The words fell. Cornelia suddenly froze, her heart giving a violent shudder. Her palms grew damp with sweat as she clutched the manuscript in a death grip. How could this be? How could such news have leaked? Instantly, the room erupted into chaos again, with everyone raising their cameras and whispering among themselves. The situation was momentarily out of control. Cornelia looked at the two on stage. Clearly, both were caught off guard by this sudden news. At this moment, Billy's expression grew increasingly grim. Percival glanced at Cornelia in the crowd. Their eyes met, and a flicker of disgust flashed in the man's gaze. Cornelia clenched her hands so tightly they turned pale. Percival quickly averted his gaze, masking that flicker of emotion, his face remaining composed as ever. "Just rumors. The Sterling family's corporation will swiftly investigate who's maliciously spreading these messages and will also provide an explanation to the media." The dimly lit corridor, Cornelia leaned against the wall, her eyes filled with disappointment. Just moments ago, Percival's intimate gestures with that woman kept replaying in her mind. She closed her eyes, forcing herself not to dwell on it. Suddenly, a pair of large hands tightly grabbed Cornelia, before Cornelia could react. She was pulled into the break room. The door slammed shut with a bang. Cornelia's back collided violently against the wall, the pain radiating along her spine. A familiar scent enveloped her, instantly stealing Cornelia's breath away. Cornelia looked up, and in the dim light, the figure before her was none other than Percival. She was about to speak when Percival suddenly seized her by the throat. The man was gripping Cornelia tightly with one hand, making Cornelia momentarily struggle for breath. Percival had a dark expression, his eyes icy and his voice low. "I told you to behave." Cornelia winced in pain, feeling her body grow heavy. She looked up at Percival. Meeting those pitch-black eyes filled with disgust, Cornelia stiffened, her struggles turning feeble and futile. Percival gazed at Cornelia, his voice dangerously low. "Cornelia, is this what you wanted to see?" Cornelia clutched the man's wrist tightly, her voice hoarse. "Percival, this matter has nothing to do with me." Percival frowned deeply, his face filled with impatience, his fingertips pressing harder until veins bulged. "I warned you to be a smart woman, don't do things you shouldn't." Who else but her would deliberately spread rumors at his engagement party? Cornelia had slightly reddened eyes, tears welling at the corners, her voice choked with emotion. "Percival, in your eyes, am I really that worthless?" Percival looked into her tear-filled eyes. Feeling an inexplicable tightness in his chest, he frowned, consumed by the urge to vent the fury burning within him. Percival leaned down, roughly silencing Cornelia with a biting kiss, his voice low and dark. "If you don't want others to see you like this, behave yourself." Percival ripped open Cornelia's clothes, undid the leather buckle, and pressed down on her. Cornelia had no time to react before a sharp pain suddenly struck her. She let out a gasp, then bit her lip hard to stifle any sound. Percival seemed to be venting his dissatisfaction, his movements beneath becoming even more rough. The restroom was dimly lit, the air thick with an ambiguous atmosphere. After a long while, Percival finally withdrew his body. Cornelia only felt utterly exhausted, her legs giving way as she collapsed to the floor. Percival cast a cold glance at Cornelia and tossed the clothes over, his voice icy. "Put your clothes on." Cornelia's body stiffened slightly, the pain still lingering. Then, Percival's voice sounded again. "You'd better behave yourself. After all, being someone's mistress isn't a respectable thing to do." Percival's words were like a sharp blade, ruthlessly tearing through Cornelia's heart. The pain so intense that Cornelia could barely breathe. Cornelia collapsed onto the floor, covering her naked body. The pain between her legs still lingered faintly, but it was nothing compared to the agony in her heart, in front of Percival. Cornelia felt like nothing more than a ragged doll, used and discarded without a shred of dignity. Cornelia straightened her clothes and dragged her exhausted, aching body out of the lounge. At the engagement venue, Percival was seen with one arm around Billy's waist and the other holding a wine glass for toasts, their behavior intimate. Cornelia stared at the man before her, as if nothing had just happened. "Congratulations to Mr. Percival on his upcoming marriage with Miss Billy." "Indeed, Mr. Percival and Mrs. Billy are such a perfect match." The surrounding waves of blessings echoed in Cornelia's ears, sounding so piercing. At this moment, Cornelia could only feel a deep bitterness in her heart. She raised the wine glass on the table and gulped it down fiercely, one cup after another. Cornelia silently vented her emotions, hot tears streaming down the corners of her eyes. She lost count of how much she drank, only feeling a sharp pain in her abdomen. Her vision darkening until she could see no more. Inside the hospital, Cornelia clutched her abdomen, cold sweat beading on her forehead. The doctor handed the report to Cornelia, speaking sternly, "You drank so much while pregnant." "The fetus is fine for now." Cornelia stood frozen in place, staring blankly at the ultrasound report in her hand. "Pregnant, she's pregnant." Cornelia trembled, her eyes filled with confusion. She lowered her head and touched her abdomen, feeling waves of pain in her chest. Why now of all times? At the Sterling family villa, the door was pushed open. Cornelia tightly gripped the doorknob, staring blankly at Percival in the living room. The man heard the noise and looked up, his brows suddenly furrowing when he saw Cornelia, his voice low. "What are you doing here?" Cornelia looked at Percival, her grip on the doorknob gradually tightening. She let go and slowly walked up to Percival, her voice hoarse. "I want to talk to you." Percival furrowed his brows, a trace of irritation flashing in his dark eyes. "What else is there to talk about between you and me?" Percival looked up at Cornelia and suddenly froze for a moment. The Cornelia before him looked haggard, her face pale. She stood there as if a gust of wind could blow her away. Looking at Cornelia in this state, Percival felt slightly dazed, and an inexplicable pang of heartache stirred within him. He had never seen Cornelia like this before. The woman gazed at him with slightly reddened eyes, her voice choked with emotion. "Percival, could you please not treat me as her? Just turn and look at me, would you?" Percival felt his heart tremble at her words. Cornelia's tone seemed almost pleading. This wasn't like her usual self. Percival felt a pang in his heart. "I really like you, Percival." Cornelia spoke hoarsely, unable to resist reaching out to caress Percival's cheek. Percival was momentarily stunned, then suppressed this inexplicable emotion. After regaining his composure, he furrowed his brows, roughly pushing Cornelia away, his voice icy. "I told you, you can never compare to Ethel. You're just a replacement." Cornelia froze for a moment, her heart suddenly trembling. Percival's words were like a sharp blade, directly piercing through Cornelia's heart. Cornelia felt as if she had plunged into the depths of a lake, her entire body pierced by an icy coldness, her heart torn apart with unbearable pain. She raised her eyes to look at Percival, tears welling up as she forced the words out from her throat. "Fine, it was my fault for being shameless. I shouldn't have come. I should have known your answer long ago." Percival remained silent, watching Cornelia before him, emotions surging in the depths of his eyes. Cornelia understood that she shouldn't be foolish anymore. She could never replace that person. At this thought, Cornelia lifted her gaze, a bitter smile curling at the corners of her lips, her voice hoarse. "Percival, I wish you happiness." After saying this, Cornelia didn't want to stay a moment longer. Watching Cornelia's figure gradually disappear into the distance, Percival felt a dull ache in his heart. That sensation surged through Percival's entire body like an electric current. He stood there in a daze, clutching his chest, unable to snap out of it for a long time. Is he feeling heartache for Cornelia? Inside the hospital, Cornelia looked at the report in her hand, her dry eyes faintly stinging as moisture welled up. The doctor glanced up at Cornelia and asked, "Have you made your decision?" Cornelia bit her lip hard, her voice hoarse and her tone resolute. "The decision is made." The doctor nodded, his voice calm. "Your current physical condition isn't suitable for surgery. I'll arrange a time for you as soon as possible. In the meantime, you need to focus on resting and recuperating." Cornelia lowered her head deeply, touched her belly, and the light in her eyes completely extinguished. She knew this child should not have come. She could offer this child no happiness, not even a name. 1 week later, inside the apartment, Percival pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air still thick with the scent of dust. He frowned, a vague sense of foreboding creeping into his heart. He didn't even know why he had come here in the first place. That night, Cornelia's words kept echoing in his mind. He only thought Cornelia was throwing a tantrum, as usual, and that she would be fine in a few days without needing to be coaxed. He had always been this dismissive toward her. The house was empty, not even a trace of familiar scent could be detected. Percival's footsteps suddenly halted, a sense of unease spreading through his chest. The house is empty. Cornelia's belongings are all gone. Percival's heart suddenly tightened. Has Cornelia really left? Percival frowned deeply. Just as he turned to leave and chase after her, a hospital report on the table caught his attention. With just one glance, Percival shuddered violently. The next second, Percival burst out the door and ran toward the hospital like a madman. Outside the flow of people, the doctor repeated the postoperative precautions over and over. Cornelia lay on the examination bed, her hands tightly gripping the cold railings, her long lashes trembling. Her gaunt face was deathly pale, exhaustion written across every feature. She caressed her abdomen as a tear suddenly slipped from the corner of her eye. Cornelia closed her eyes, veiling the sorrow within them. The curtain beside was pulled down with a swish. A large hand suddenly appeared, gripping the curtain tightly and seizing Cornelia's wrist. Cornelia suddenly opened her eyes, meeting Percival's pitch-black gaze. The man's eyes were bloodshot, his fingers tightening around Cornelia's hand until veins bulged. Cornelia stared at him in shock until the pain hit, then she finally spoke. "Why did you?" Before she could finish, Percival sharply cut her off. His voice was hoarse, trembling uncontrollably as he spoke. "You're pregnant. Why didn't you tell me?" Percival looked flustered, the sweat on his forehead not even wiped away yet. His hands were tightly clutching that report, looking at the Percival before her. Cornelia seemed to vaguely detect a trace of warmth in Percival's gaze, but when she saw that report again, Cornelia's heart instantly ached with a sharp pang. "I'm asking you, why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" Seeing Cornelia remain silent, Percival asked again word by word, his voice urgent. Cornelia looked at Percival and let out a bitter laugh. "Would telling you have made any difference? Do you even care?" Cornelia on her haggard face, the tear stains at the corners of her eyes were still faintly visible. Cornelia touched her abdomen, her voice hoarse. "Anyway, this child is already gone. He shouldn't have come. It's my fault as his mother." Hearing this, Percival widened his eyes, his voice turning somewhat hoarse. "Have you already gotten rid of it?" Percival, for some reason, his heart ached unbearably upon hearing this news. An inexplicable rage surged within him. Percival, his eyes bloodshot, he stepped forward and grabbed Cornelia's wrist again, his voice hoarse. "Why did you make the decision on your own? Why didn't you discuss it with me? After all, I'm also this child's." At this point, Percival suddenly came to his senses and didn't continue. It seemed he knew he wasn't qualified to say those words. Cornelia looked at Percival before her and couldn't help but find it somewhat amusing. Her voice choked with emotion. "Did I tell you there was another outcome? To let him be born?" Cornelia had slightly reddened eyes, her frail body barely able to speak, her voice faint. "Let him be born as a nameless, illegitimate child, without even an identity. How could he grow up happy?" Hearing this, Percival's heart sank heavily, and he fell silent, a faint bitterness rising in his chest. Looking at the haggard Cornelia before him, he even hesitated to meet Cornelia's gaze. Cornelia was right. What right did he have to question her? Even if Cornelia told him the truth about the current situation, could he give this child a rightful name? Percival kept his head deeply bowed, clutching the report tightly in his hand, his heart filled with bitterness. Percival didn't even know why he cared so much about Cornelia's child, yet the ache in his heart was something he couldn't conceal. Cornelia gazed at the silent Percival before her, recalling everything that had happened during this time. Cornelia's heart had already turned to ashes. She slightly raised her eyes, struggling to support her weak body, her voice hoarse. "Mr. Percival, I'm tired. I'm leaving first." After saying this, Cornelia broke free from Percival's hands, forcing her weak body to move forward, no longer wishing to stay. But the next second, Cornelia felt her body grow heavy, her steps becoming sluggish, his eyes grew heavy, and then everything became unclear. Inside the villa, looking at the unconscious Cornelia, she appeared so fragile at this moment. Percival frowned slightly, feeling an inexplicable ache in his heart, unable to resist reaching out to caress Cornelia's face, gazing at this familiar face. Percival's eyes held complex emotions. Once, his heart and eyes were completely filled with Ethel, and he had only regarded Cornelia as her substitute. But why, looking at Cornelia before him, did his heart ache? Suddenly, a phone ringtone broke the silence. Percival had a grim expression, his voice low. "What's the matter?" It was unclear what was said on the other end of the line. Percival seemed somewhat hesitant, raised his eyes to glance at the unconscious Cornelia, frowning deeply. After a moment of silence, he finally spoke slowly, his voice icy. I understand. I'll make all the preparations for the wedding." Percival hung up the phone and looked at the haggard Cornelia on the bed, eyes slightly reddened. The gaze toward Cornelia was no longer as icy. Percival pondered silently, lost in thought. After a long while, he finally turned and left the room. Only, Percival failed to notice that Cornelia's eyelashes had grown slightly moist. The door was gently closed. Cornelia then slowly opened her eyes. The weakness in her body left Cornelia without a shred of strength. She lay quietly on the bed, gazing at the familiar yet unfamiliar room around her, her heart filled with bitterness. Just now, Percival's words. Cornelia had heard. Cornelia touched her lower abdomen, unable to hold back her tears any longer, her voice hoarse. Percival, I really should let go now. Cornelia had accompanied Percival for 3 years, these past 3 years. No matter how Percival treated her, whether he saw her as a substitute or remained indifferent to her, Cornelia didn't care. She believed that as long as Percival was given enough time, Percival would eventually move on, and she could stand openly by his side. But now, all of this was just her own wishful thinking, and it had even dragged an innocent child into it. But this still couldn't make Percival look back at her. Suddenly, a text message arrived. Cornelia glanced at it. It was from Percival. I still have things to take care of, you should get some rest. Cornelia looked at the text message on her phone, biting her lip tightly, and let out a bitter laugh. She slightly closed her eyes, and tears once again slid down her cheeks. Sterling Family Group. Percival had bloodshot eyes, his hands clutching the report tightly. In his mind, Cornelia's figure faintly appeared. Percival was lost in thought, a dull ache throbbing in his chest. Mr. Percival, MS, Billy is here, suddenly. The secretary's voice interrupted Percival's thoughts. Percival hurriedly put away the report. There stood Billy, all smiles and speaking softly. Percival, have you picked a date for our wedding yet? Percival looked at Billy with indifferent eyes and a low voice. Yes, everything is prepared. It will take place in 2 weeks. This wedding, for Percival, was nothing more than a marriage of convenience devoid of any emotion. Although Percival felt hesitant at this moment, he couldn't afford to offend the Trevor family, as he still needed this arranged marriage. Is there still so long to wait? Percival, I really wish I could marry you right now. Billy cozied up to Percival while acting spoiled, her face full of happiness. Percival looked at Billy before him, his eyes devoid of any affection. All right, it's getting late. I'll have my secretary take you back to LJ. Percival spoke indifferently, in no mood for pretense at the moment. After speaking, Percival gently pushed Billy away. Billy was somewhat displeased but obediently left, knowing Percival never liked being pestered. Once Billy had left, Percival opened his phone and stared blankly at Ethel's photo. Looking at the photo of Ethel smiling, Percival's eyes grew somber, his voice low. Ethel, believe me, I haven't forgotten you. At this moment, Percival could no longer clearly recognize his own feelings. Over these 3 years, had he truly only treated Cornelia as a substitute for Ethel? But why would he care about a Cornelia now? Thinking of this, Percival dialed the phone, his voice low. So, has Miss Cornelia woken up? On the other end of the line, the servant's voice sounded hesitant. Miss Cornelia left as soon as she woke up. Upon hearing this, Percival felt somewhat irritated and spoke in a low, stern voice. Didn't I tell you to keep an eye on her? Why did you let her leave? Seeing Percival furious, the servant's voice trembled. We couldn't stop her. Miss Cornelia has always been strong-willed, and with her frail health and unstable emotions, we didn't dare provoke her. Percival's eyes turned bloodshot. Indeed, Cornelia's temperament was something he should have understood better. She was never one to comply. Moreover, the current Cornelia probably had even less desire to see him. But she had just undergone surgery and was physically weak. Where could she possibly go alone? At this thought, Percival couldn't help but feel a pang of worry. His voice hoarse. Everyone, go find them immediately. Inside the hotel, Cornelia dragged her weak body back to the hotel. By now, Cornelia no longer held Percival in any regard. Cornelia knew that Percival wouldn't let her go easily. But at least for now, Cornelia didn't want to see him. Suddenly, there was a rapid knocking at the door. Cornelia opened the door, and the next moment, upon seeing who it was, before the man could speak, Cornelia immediately tried to close the door. Percival braced his foot against the door and stepped forward, grabbing Cornelia's hands. His eyes carried a hint of urgency, his voice low. Why won't you stay put? Cornelia remained silent, saying nothing. Percival glanced at the various luggage scattered around the room. Feeling even more irritated, his voice hoarse, he tightened Cornelia his grip on her hand. You're leaving. I told you, you haven't repaid what you owe me. What right do you have to leave? Cornelia winced in pain, struggling to free herself from Percival's grasp. Her already weak body made Cornelia barely able to stand. Percival looked at the pale-faced Cornelia and realized that Cornelia was still very fragile at this moment. Only then did he release her wrist, his voice low. Can't you just stay quietly by my side? Cornelia looked at Percival and let out a bitter laugh. Percival, you're getting married, yet you still want to keep me by your side as your secret mistress. Cornelia's eyes turned slightly red, her voice choked with emotion. I know you'll never love me, so just let me go. Whatever I owe you, I'll find a way to repay you. okay. Cornelia's tone was full of pleading. The former Cornelia would never have easily bowed her head to Percival no matter what, but now, Cornelia didn't care anymore. She just wanted to leave Percival. She was tired of being someone else's shadow and didn't want to keep loving someone with no future. Percival stiffened slightly, looking at the Cornelia before him. No matter how much he had tried to tame her before, this woman would never easily bow her head, and these 2 times were the only instances she ever did. Once to beg for his love, and this time to ask him to let her go. At this thought, Percival felt a twinge of unwillingness. How could he let Cornelia leave? Percival frowned slightly, his voice low. I won't let you go. This was the condition we agreed upon from the beginning. Percival darkened his expression, his voice echoing once more in Cornelia's ear. So you'd better stay obediently by my side. This is what you owe me. Cornelia looked at Percival, her eyes brimming with tears. Knowing she couldn't leave, seeing Cornelia no longer object, Percival gradually calmed down. Looking at the visibly exhausted Cornelia, Percival showed a hint of pity in his eyes, his voice gentle. I'll arrange for someone to help you move back tomorrow. Take good care of yourself during this time, and I'll find time to visit you. With that, Percival turned and left the hotel. Watching Percival's retreating figure, Cornelia could only feel bitterness in her heart. She sat motionless on the bed, tears streaming silently down her face. Was she truly unable to break free? Cornelia pondered for a long while. Cornelia took a deep breath, as if making some kind of decision. She dialed the number, her voice hoarse. Victor, I want to meet with you. This time, Cornelia was determined to leave Percival. After hanging up the phone, the room fell silent once again. All the events of these past few days had left Cornelia feeling suffocated. Cornelia touched her abdomen, and a wave of grievance washed over her again, tears streaming uncontrollably. The cause between Percival and Cornelia had resulted in this innocent child bearing the bitter consequences. But over these past 3 years, Cornelia has no regrets about what she gave. Cornelia now only regrets realizing the truth too late. Thinking of this, Cornelia wiped the tears from her cheeks. She couldn't afford to be despondent. Everything could start anew, and what's past is past. Inside the restaurant, the man was dressed in a suit, exuding elegance. He sat quietly in his seat, waiting. Cornelia, over here. The man waved gently at Cornelia with a tender expression. Cornelia slightly raised her eyes, meeting the man's profound gaze. Cornelia walked over slowly, smiling softly with a gentle voice. Victor, long time no see. Victor looked at the visibly exhausted Cornelia before him, unable to hide the heartache in his eyes. Frowning slightly, his voice carried a hint of urgency. Cornelia, what's wrong? Did something happen? Cornelia waved her hand dismissively, forcing a faint smile as she spoke with feigned lightness. I'm fine, don't worry. Victor naturally didn't believe it, but still didn't press further, his voice gentle. Cornelia, is there something you need from me this time? Don't worry, I'll help however I can. Cornelia clutched her clothes tightly, her voice hoarse. Victor, I actually have something to ask for your help this time. Cornelia bit her lip tightly, unsure how to begin. It's all right, no need to be formal with me. Victor seemed to notice Cornelia's embarrassment, his voice gentle. After a moment of silence, Cornelia finally spoke hesitantly. Victor, could you lend me some money? I'll definitely find a way to pay you back later. How much? Victor said without a hint of hesitation. Cornelia lowered her head deeply, her voice hoarse. 30 million, if it's inconvenient. Never mind. All right, I have it. Give me a week. Before Cornelia could finish, Victor agreed directly. Cornelia was stunned for a moment. She hadn't expected Victor to agree so readily without a second thought. Cornelia regained her composure, her eyes slightly reddened, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you, Victor. Victor smiled faintly, his voice gentle. It's nothing, just Cornelia. Is there something you need? Hearing this, Cornelia's eyes instantly dimmed, a wave of bitterness washing over her heart, one after another. The events of this period resurfaced in her mind. Cornelia didn't speak, only shaking her head weakly. Victor didn't ask further. He knew Cornelia didn't want to talk about it. Since childhood, Cornelia had always been Victor's acquaintance, and he knew Cornelia was a determined and strong-willed person. If he hadn't gone abroad 5 years ago, how could he have been unaware the Tennyson family had faced such a situation? And 3 years ago, he completely lost contact with Cornelia. Looking at the Cornelia before him, so fragile she seemed on the verge of shattering, Victor couldn't help but feel a pang of heartache. He only regretted returning too late, having thought he would never see Cornelia again. If not for that exclusive interview that day, he wouldn't have known Cornelia was still in this city, working as a journalist. Victor gently patted Cornelia, his voice soft. It's okay, you can tell me when you're ready, let's eat first. I'll help you with the money. Cornelia held back her tears. Her voice hoarse. Victor, don't worry, I'll definitely pay you back. If she hadn't been truly desperate, Cornelia would never have asked Victor for help. Cornelia didn't want to owe anyone, but right now she had no choice. She truly wanted to leave Percival. Victor shook his head gently, his voice soft. It's all right, no rush to repay. Don't forget, we've always been friends. Cornelia nodded with a smile, but her gaze was drawn to a news alert on her phone. 1 week later, the wedding between the Sterling family's Mr. Percival and the Trevor family's heiress will be held at the Lena Hotel. In an instant, Cornelia's heart sank heavily, overwhelmed with bitterness. After that night, Percival had someone move Cornelia's belongings back to her original residence the next day. During these days, Percival would occasionally come to see her, but each time, neither of them spoke. Percival would always bring some tonics and then remind Cornelia to rest well. Cornelia still naively clung to a sliver of hope. Percival wondered if there was still a trace of guilt in his heart toward her, but in the end, he still had to marry her. Although this outcome was something Cornelia had long understood in her heart, Percival had already given Cornelia the answer. It's just that Cornelia still naively clung to a sliver of hope. For the past 3 years, only Cornelia has been unable to let go. At this thought, Cornelia let out a bitter laugh. But it's all right, soon she will owe him nothing more. This relationship, in the end, must be forcibly released from her grasp. 1 week later, at the Lena Hotel. The surroundings were adorned with luxurious decorations, and the seats below were filled with guests. The venue was filled with laughter and joy. Major journalists were holding cameras, eager to document this union between two prominent families. Cornelia hid in the crowd, watching everything before her with a bitter ache in her heart. Today was his wedding day, and it was also the day Cornelia would completely say goodbye to these 3 years. On the stage, Percival, dressed in a sharp suit, gently held Billy, who was clad in a white wedding dress. The guests raised their glasses one after another to toast the newlyweds. With blessings echoing all around, Percival held a wine glass in one hand, smiling. Thank you all for coming to the wedding. Please enjoy the food and drinks. Facing interviews from reporters and blessings from guests, Percival remained composed as ever. Billy nestled in Percival's arms, her eyes filled with happiness, her voice gentle. Percival, I've finally married you. Percival did not respond, gazing at the Billy before him with not a trace of love in his eyes, yet his mind kept conjuring images of Cornelia. Not even recalling Ethel, his thoughts were completely occupied by Cornelia, tearfully asking if he could love her. In the end, she begged with a haggard face, pleading whether I could let her go. At this thought, Percival felt a dull ache in his chest, but coming to his senses, Percival once again suppressed this inexplicable emotion. Percival could only allow himself to love Ethel, yet dared not admit his concern for Cornelia. Cornelia stood in the corner, watching the scene before her, her heart filled with bitterness. Such scenes Cornelia had fantasized about countless times, yet fantasies remain fantasies. The bride in the wedding dress was never her. At this thought, Cornelia couldn't help but feel a tinge of irony in her heart. Percival and Billy were each greeting the guests. Suddenly, as he looked up, Percival caught sight of a familiar figure in the corner. Their eyes met. Cornelia turned and walked away. Seeing Cornelia about to leave, Percival panicked slightly, weaving through the crowd to chase after her. Percival pulled Cornelia into a corner, his voice low. What are you doing here? Cornelia looked up at Percival and handed him Percival a bank card. Her eyes were indifferent, her voice low. Mr. Percival, this is the money I owe you. Today, I've repaid it all. From now on, we're even. Hearing this, Percival was momentarily stunned, feeling inexplicably flustered. Gripping Cornelia's wrist tightly, he frowned slightly and spoke in a low voice. What do you mean? Are you planning to leave? Cornelia pulled her hand away from Percival and took a step back, looking at Percival before her. Cornelia wanted to take one last good look at the man she had loved for 3 years. Her heart still filled with reluctance, but she had to wake up. The man before her did not love her. Cornelia's eyes were slightly red, holding back tears, her voice choked with emotion. Percival, I don't want to be someone else's shadow anymore. I just want to be Cornelia. Chapter 13. Percival felt his heart suddenly tremble violently, his body momentarily frozen in shock, gazing at the Cornelia before him. Cornelia was dressed in a red miniskirt, appearing so radiant and captivating in his eyes at this moment, yet in the past, he had never felt this way, because Ethel preferred simplicity, in order for Cornelia to resemble her more. Percival never allowed Cornelia to wear overly bright colors for these 3 years, and Cornelia strived to accommodate him. Percival to make him happy. Percival suddenly remembered that Cornelia had always favored vibrant colors and had always stayed true to herself, yet over these 3 years, Percival had never paid it any mind. Percival wanted to say something more, but his throat tightened, leaving him speechless. Seeing Percival remain silent, Cornelia let out a bitter laugh. Without another word, he turned and left without looking back. Percival didn't stop her. He knew he had no reason to hold her back anymore. His hand clutched the bank card tightly, lost in thought. His heart ached faintly. Sterling Family Villa. The exhausting wedding day finally came to an end. Percival felt utterly drained, both physically and mentally. In the end, he couldn't even recognize himself anymore, having gone through with this so-called marriage of convenience. At the wedding venue, when he saw Cornelia walk away and caught sight of that bank card, Percival felt an inexplicable thought cross his mind, that is to abandon everything, to retain Cornelia. But this thought was quickly suppressed by Percival. He couldn't quite understand why he had such a thought. To cancel the wedding for Cornelia, how could he? Percival quickly took a shower and lay calmly on the bed, but his mind was filled with thoughts of Cornelia. Percival felt unwilling in his heart. Has she really left? A long moment passed. Billy stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a bathrobe. Under the dim light, the woman's figure was graceful, half-exposed skin, the fragrance lingering in the air. Everything was the ambiguity of newlyweds. Billy slowly moved closer to Percival, her voice gentle. Percival, let's rest. Percival naturally understood Billy's meaning, but at this moment, he was in no mood to think about such matters. Percival looked indifferent, his voice low. Sleep now. With that said, Percival turned off the light and obediently lay down to sleep on his side. No more words were spoken, and there was not the slightest further action. Billy felt somewhat unwilling, shedding her robe. She turned and embraced Percival. The touch of the woman's soft skin, combined with the effect of hormones, the slight intoxication from alcohol. Percival was getting to his head. Everything that happened today, Cornelia kept flashing through his mind. It made Percival accumulate a nameless anger in his heart, the restlessness in his heart. Percival desperately wanted to vent his emotions. Billy's hands wandered restlessly over Percival's body. Suddenly, Percival turned over and pinned Billy beneath him. The air around them was thick with tension. Percival felt somewhat dazed. Percival gazed at Billy, and in a daze, reached out to remove Billy's clothes, trying to vent the emotions that have built up throughout the day. Under the dim light, Percival seemed to momentarily mistake Billy for Cornelia. Just as Percival was about to lose his rationality, suddenly, Billy softly called out, Percival, hearing the voice. Percival finally snapped out of his daze. When he saw the woman before him clearly, the emotions from moments ago instantly dissipated. Percival stood up, halting his next move, his voice low. I'm tired today, let's sleep. As he spoke, Percival took a step to the side. Billy was momentarily stunned, but her gaze remained gentle, her voice soft. Percival, today is our wedding day. Percival seemed somewhat impatient and emphasized once again, I'm really tired today. Seeing Percival like this, Billy felt somewhat displeased, continuing to tease. Suddenly, Percival abruptly sat up from the bed and put on his clothes, frowning slightly. His voice was low. I still have some unfinished business, and you've had a long day. Get some rest early. Billy was momentarily stunned, unable to react immediately, her tone carrying a hint of displeasure. Percival, where are you going? Percival ignored Billy, put on his clothes, and walked straight out of the room. Percival's private residence. Percival looked at the empty room, the familiar space now filled with Cornelia's presence. Percival furrowed his brows, his gaze vacant, as if he didn't quite understand himself. This marriage was merely a facade from the start, a union orchestrated solely for the sake of his Sterling family's corporation. As for Billy, Percival harbored not an ounce of affection for her. Ethel, moreover, was the woman Percival truly loved, even though Ethel has been gone for 3 years. Yet no other woman could catch his eye. As for Cornelia, she was merely seen as a substitute for Ethel. But just moments ago, Percival nearly lost his composure. In a daze, he even mistook Billy for Cornelia. Lately, he found himself thinking of Cornelia even more often than Ethel. At this thought, Percival felt somewhat unsettled. Had he already forgotten Ethel, or had Cornelia already replaced Ethel in his heart? In the dimly lit room, the man's figure flickered in and out of view. Suddenly, Percival stood up abruptly and walked out of the villa. He couldn't bear the thought of Cornelia leaving just like that, even more unwilling to accept that there would be no more ties between them in the future. On the road, under the dim streetlights, The silhouettes of a man and a woman were cast. Victor looked at Cornelia, who had remained silent the entire way, with some concern. He didn't know what exactly had happened to Cornelia, but Victor could see Cornelia's current loneliness and sorrow. After a long silence, Victor finally broke the quiet. Victor looked at Cornelia before him, feeling a pang of heartache, his voice gentle. "Cornelia, if there's anything you need from me, don't hide it, just tell me." Cornelia nodded slightly, forcing a faint smile, her voice slightly hoarse. "Yes, thank you Victor, I'm fine." Victor could see Cornelia's forced smile, and it made his heart ache. Without regard for propriety, she couldn't help but step forward and gently embrace Cornelia. Her voice tender. "Cornelia, I know you don't want to talk, but it's okay. I'm always here for you. You still have me as a friend." Cornelia was momentarily stunned, then gently pushed Victor away. Victor suddenly realized his earlier behavior had been somewhat impolite and quickly released his hands. Cornelia understood Victor's concern and responded with a gentle smile, her voice soft. "Don't worry, Victor, I'm really fine." Victor gazed at Cornelia before him, his heart aching slightly. Victor gently patted Cornelia's shoulder, his gaze warm and voice tender. "You don't have to hold it in. If you really want to cry, just let it out." In an instant, Cornelia's facade completely crumbled at that moment. She didn't know since when there was no one left by her side to rely on. No one ever told her that she didn't have to pretend to be strong when she couldn't hold on anymore. For the past 3 years, Cornelia had silently endured all the sorrow alone. She had been arduously loving a man with no future. Cornelia bit her lip tightly, her eyes already slightly moist, feeling only that her nose was very sore. The tears could no longer be held back. Cornelia held herself tightly, unleashing her emotions without restraint. All the grievances and sorrows accumulated in her heart over the past 3 years poured out in this moment. At this moment, Cornelia truly had no strength left to pretend to be strong. After today, Cornelia would simply be Cornelia. No longer anyone. Under the pitch-black moonlight, the woman's nearly shattered figure was reflected. Victor quietly stayed by her side, his heart filled with bitterness. Victor remained silent. He understood Cornelia's sorrow, and the only thing he could do now was to quietly stay by her side. A long time passed. Cornelia gradually calmed down. Victor's eyes were slightly red as he gently wiped away the tears from Cornelia's eyes. Cornelia looked up and let out a soft laugh, her voice gentle. "Sorry, Victor, I lost my composure earlier, but I'm feeling much better now." Victor smiled faintly, his eyes filled with tenderness, his voice soft. "Cornelia, you don't have to pretend to be strong in front of me. Go back and get some rest." Cornelia nodded with a gentle smile, her voice soft. "You should head back too. I'm really fine now." Victor waved with a smile, seeing Cornelia calm again. Victor finally left with peace of mind. Cornelia raised her eyes to the bright moon in the night sky and smiled faintly. She took a deep breath, her voice hoarse. "I can finally be myself now, Percival, and I must let you go too." Inside the apartment, everything that happened this day left Cornelia physically and mentally exhausted. But fortunately, from now on, she no longer owes Percival anything. Everything from these 3 years has come to an end. Cornelia quickly took a shower and lay on the bed, quietly lost in thought. Today is Percival's wedding day. He must be very happy. At this thought, Cornelia couldn't help but feel sad in her heart. After all, 3 years of feelings, how could she just let go so easily? Suddenly, the door swung open. Cornelia startled, she bolted upright from the bed, pulling the blanket tightly around herself to cover her body completely. But when she saw the appearance of the newcomer, Cornelia's heart skipped a beat. It was that familiar face again. With a bang, Percival slammed the door shut. He glanced up at Cornelia, his eyes filled with complex emotions. Percival's sudden appearance left Cornelia somewhat startled. She couldn't understand why the newlywed Percival had come to see her. She noticed Percival was still wearing the suit from the wedding, with some buttons seemingly left undone. As she looked at Percival before her, Cornelia's heart sank abruptly, an inexplicable bitterness welling up inside. Did he come here deliberately to humiliate her? Cornelia turned her head, not even wanting to look at Percival's face anymore, her voice icy. "What are you here for?" Percival quickly stepped forward, only to grab Cornelia's chin, his voice low. "What? You don't want to see me that much?" Their gazes met once again. Cornelia stared at the familiar face before her. Scenes from the past 3 years flooded back into her mind. Cornelia, her eyes slightly reddened, her gaze indifferent. She let out a light laugh. "Mr. Percival, isn't it inappropriate for you to come see me on your wedding day?" Percival, his face darkened, his heart tightened, his voice low. Cornelia, I won't let you leave. Looking at the Percival before her, Cornelia couldn't help but find it amusing, her voice hoarse. Percival. We're even now, I don't owe you anything anymore. Hearing this, Percival's eyes turned icy, his anger growing even fiercer. He couldn't understand where Cornelia had managed to gather so much money in such a short time. All sorts of unspeakable thoughts were Percival breeding in his mind. Percival frowned slightly, his gaze indifferent as he spoke in a low, stern voice. Where did you get the money from? What? Found yourself another sugar daddy? Percival's words once again made Cornelia's heart sting sharply. For the past 3 years, in Percival's heart, had he always seen himself as this filthy and despicable. At this thought, Cornelia felt nothing but bitterness in her heart. Finding it all bitterly ironic, Cornelia looked at the Percival before her, her eyes slightly reddened, her voice hoarse. Yes, I did find a sugar daddy. What's it to you? As the words fell, Percival suddenly froze in place. Emotions churned relentlessly in his eyes, an inexplicable fury rising in his heart. His grip on Cornelia's hand tightened further, his voice low and dark. Cornelia, you'd better not test me, tell me, staring at the Percival before her. Cornelia let out a bitter laugh, her voice choked with emotion. Percival, don't forget, you're already married, these matters have nothing to do with you. Cornelia's nose tingled with suppressed emotion as she fought back tears, her tone resolute. I've already repaid what I owed you, so from now on, Mr. Percival, let's not disturb each other again. Percival froze momentarily, staring at the utterly determined Cornelia before him. Percival couldn't help but feel a pang of bitterness in his heart. Once upon a time, Percival wouldn't have cared the slightest Cornelia's feelings. Now, the Cornelia before him had such coldness in her eyes. The tenderness that once filled her gaze when she looked at him was gone. Percival remained silent. All words stuck in his throat. Yes, Cornelia had already repaid everything. What right did he have to keep him by his side? But at this moment, Percival seemed as if possessed by madness. Cornelia's words from earlier kept echoing in Percival's ears. This made Percival feel increasingly irritated and annoyed. Cornelia really doesn't like her anymore. Has she really found someone else? At this thought, Percival felt unwilling to accept it, his mind no longer able to focus on anything else. Percival darkened his expression, his eyes icy cold, somewhat losing his rationality as he growled in a low voice. Cornelia, I warn you, no matter what, you are my woman. After saying this, Percival directly leaned down and pinned Cornelia beneath him. One hand tightly restrained Cornelia's wrists, while the other reached to remove Cornelia's clothing. Cornelia startled, barely able to react in time, Percival's eyes bloodshot, his hand wandering recklessly over Cornelia's body. Cornelia turned pale. She knew what Percival was about to do, but at this moment, she no longer wanted to do such things with Percival. Cornelia let out a scream, resisting desperately, her voice hoarse. Percival, get away from me. Seeing Cornelia's fierce resistance, Percival's anger only grew, his hands tightened even more, his voice low and menacing. Shut up, behave. Realizing her struggles were futile, Cornelia panicked as Percival roughly tore open her clothes. Percival gazed at Cornelia before him, his eyes as if wanting to devour Cornelia. As Percival was about to remove the last piece of clothing from his body, Cornelia bit her lip tightly, unable to hold back her tears any longer, her voice hoarse, her tone almost pleading. Percival, please, I'm not well yet, don't do this. In an instant, Percival froze abruptly, halting his next move. What on earth was he doing? Cornelia had just undergone an abortion surgery. Percival stood up, straightened his clothes, and wrapped the blanket around Cornelia. Gazing at the tear-streaked face of Cornelia, Percival felt a sharp pang in his chest, his voice turning somber. Get some rest, I'm leaving. With that, Percival turned and left the room, gently closing the door behind him. Percival paused in thought, glanced back, and then slapped himself across the face. Sterling family conglomerate. Percival stared blankly, his mind still preoccupied with the events of the previous night. For a moment, Percival seemed unable to accept Cornelia having no remaining ties with him. Percival couldn't understand why he had changed so much during this time, nor did he understand what his feelings for Cornelia truly were at this moment. After 3 years of companionship, Percival seemed to have long grown accustomed to Cornelia's presence. He couldn't accept Cornelia's departure, and he would never allow something like Cornelia meeting other men to happen. But what reason does he have now to keep bothering her? At this thought, Percival couldn't help but feel irritated. Suddenly, a sound broke Percival's train of thought. Percival, I have something to tell you. Percival slightly raised his eyes, And the person before him was none other than Billy. There was Billy. Her face dark with anger, speaking in a low voice. Percival, where were you last night? Percival, already irritated, grew even more impatient at the sight of Billy, but there was no way around it. What happened last night couldn't be let known to Billy. Percival forced a faint smile, his voice calm. Billy, didn't I tell you last night? I had something to take care of. Really? Billy remained displeased, clearly skeptical of Percival's excuse. Percival knew full well that Billy wouldn't easily believe him. He turned and pointed to the secretary beside him. Speaking calmly, you can ask Gary. He was with me at the company handling it last night. Hearing this, Billy glanced up at the secretary nearby. The secretary simply nodded with a smile, speaking affirmatively. Yes, Mrs. Billy, that project was quite tricky, so Mr. Percival was working on it all last night. Seeing this, Billy finally suppressed her anger and gradually calmed down. Reaching out to hold Percival's arm, she pretended to be angry and said, but Percival, last night was our wedding night. Percival remained calm, extending his hand to gently pat Billy's hand. His voice composed, be good, I've been busy lately. I'll spend time with you once I finish handling these matters. Fine, Billy pouted, though feeling somewhat discontented inside, but she didn't dare say anything more. She knew that if she persisted, Percival would surely be displeased. Half a month later, at the company, Cornelia was busy working. Since that night, Percival hadn't come looking for Cornelia again. Meanwhile, Cornelia gradually regained her health. For the past half-month, Cornelia has been keeping herself as busy as possible to avoid thinking about those matters. Although Cornelia still occasionally thinks of Percival, but now, Cornelia has also given up. It's just that 3 years of feelings aren't so easy to let go of. What's left is to leave it to time. Cornelia believes she will eventually move on. At this moment, Cornelia only hopes that Percival won't come looking for her again. Right now, she just wants to focus on working hard and living well, to repay the debt owed to Victor as soon as possible. By the way, any juicy news lately? Suddenly, a man's voice sounded from beside me. Yes, ever since the Sterling and Trevor families got married. There hasn't been much news. The woman next to her pursed her lips. I heard that Percival and Billy don't seem to get along very well. Apparently, Percival rarely goes home and is often at the company. A long-haired woman beside her smiled, her face full of curiosity. How is that possible? All right, let's get back to work. This isn't something we should be worrying about. The woman nearby found it somewhat amusing. After all, they couldn't have missed how grand this alliance was. Moreover, at the scene, Percival and Billy looked very much in love. After a burst of laughter, the discussion abruptly ceased. Cornelia's ears were once again enveloped in silence. Hearing Percival's name, Cornelia felt a slight tremble in her heart, but soon, Cornelia came to her senses. Percival, none of this had anything to do with her anymore. Thinking of this, Cornelia once again suppressed her emotions and resumed her work. Suddenly, the phone screen lit up. Cornelia glanced at it. It was a text message, and when Cornelia clearly saw the name, her body stiffened abruptly, and her heart sank. Cornelia frowned slightly, staring blankly at the text message. The sender of the message was none other than Percival. The content of the message read, Cornelia, let's meet and talk again. Cornelia stared at the text message, lost in thought. For the past half-month, Cornelia had thought Percival would never contact her again. It even gave Cornelia the illusion that she was gradually letting go. She had believed that no matter what news came from Percival, she wouldn't care anymore. It was only when Percival actually contacted Cornelia again. Cornelia still couldn't control her emotions. Even Cornelia had a subconscious voice deep in her heart, urging her to go see that man. Cornelia hesitated for a long while, finally replied to Percival's private residence. Percival stared at his phone, lost in thought. For the past half-month, to avoid arousing Billy's suspicion, Percival had to suppress his desire to seek out Cornelia. When he didn't want to return home, he used work as an excuse. When he did go home, he claimed to be exhausted. Ever since their marriage, he had not shared a bed with Billy even once. Billy was initially unwilling to accept it and kept provoking Percival in various ways. But Percival simply refused to respond, avoiding her every time. Gradually, this made Billy somewhat resentful, and she stopped taking the initiative. This, in turn, gave Percival some time to himself for a while. During this time, Percival had not contacted Cornelia again, but he would still occasionally sneak a peek at her. But he would only glance from afar before leaving. Percival knew that Cornelia didn't want to see him, but Percival still wanted to ask Cornelia again today. Finally, the phone screen lit up. It was Cornelia who sent the message. Percival, Were even now, Percival looked up, his eyes instantly dimming. He knew she wouldn't come. Liuxiang Garden. It was summer at that time. It was the season when gardenias bloomed. The garden was filled with the delicate fragrance of gardenias. They looked even more beautiful under the sunlight. Percival leaned against the tree in solitude, gazing at the gardenias before him, lost in thought. This garden was Percival and Ethel South's frequent meeting place in the past, because Ethel loved gardenias so much. Her name was derived from them, and in Percival's heart, Ethel was just like a gardenia, so pure and flawless, cool and beautiful. Ever since Ethel left, whenever he felt down or missed Ethel, Percival would come here to see the gardenias and smell their fragrance. Gazing at this patch of gardenias, Percival had tender eyes and a gentle voice. Ethel, for these 3 years, I've thought of you every day. Can you feel it? Percival had slightly reddened eyes and a hoarse voice. Ethel. Do you blame me? But she really looks so much like you. I truly miss you so much. Percival fell silent for a moment before speaking again. Why, she was clearly just your substitute, so why do I care so much? Ethel, have I fallen for her? Will you blame me? As the words left his lips, Percival seemed momentarily stunned. At some unknown point, Percival's heart no longer seemed to hold only Ethel. 3 years of living side by side, as if in some corner of his heart there had always been Cornelia occupying a place, only Percival had never noticed. Suddenly, Percival caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. The person was wearing a white dress, so similar to the Ethel in his memory. Percival was momentarily dazed and couldn't help but step forward to grab the person's wrist. With gentle eyes, in his haze, he subconsciously called out softly, Ethel. When that person turned around and their face came into clear view, Percival finally snapped out of his daze. His eyes filled with complex emotions. The person standing before Percival now was none other than Cornelia. Cornelia was momentarily stunned, but at the sight of Percival, her heart couldn't help but tremble. Just now, Percival's soft call, though barely audible, was still heard by Cornelia. She thought she might have misheard, but upon seeing Percival's face, Cornelia knew she hadn't misheard, and a pang of sorrow welled up in her heart. Over the past 3 years, Cornelia never wanted to hear, and feared most, the name Ethel. Cornelia could understand that Ethel was a special presence to Percival. Just as Percival meant to Cornelia, Percival's lingering regrets. Cornelia could always try to understand. Cornelia could let Percival use her as a substitute. Because she loved Percival, she was willing to wait, no matter how long. But Cornelia didn't want, nor could she bear, Percival forever seeing her only as someone else's shadow. Percival knew that the soft call he had uttered in his daze just now, Cornelia must have heard it. Looking at the Cornelia before him, Percival released his grip, his voice low. Why didn't you come to see me? Cornelia gazed indifferently, her voice calm. Mr. Percival, we have nothing more to say. With that, Cornelia wanted no further entanglement with Percival and turned to leave. Seeing Cornelia about to leave, Percival instinctively reached out and grabbed her hand. He knew it would be difficult to see her again. Immediately after, Percival's voice sounded again. I told you, I won't let you go. Cornelia looked at the Percival before her, and the fury in her heart instantly flared up. The emotions accumulated over the years could no longer be suppressed. Cornelia wrenched her hand free from Percival, her eyes slightly reddened, her voice hoarse. Enough, Percival. I owe you nothing. Haven't 3 years as her substitute been enough? Cornelia fought back tears of grievance, her voice choked with emotion. Percival, why pretend to be so devoted, mourning Ethel while making me her stand-in, and now you're marrying another woman? Cornelia pressed forward relentlessly, her voice icy. Ask yourself, who have you truly been fair to? With that, Cornelia turned and left without looking back, unwilling to engage further. Only Percival remained. Standing alone in place, Percival did not step forward to stop her. Instead, he stood frozen in place, his heart sinking abruptly. Cornelia's words couldn't help but make Percival ponder deeply. Indeed, who had truly occupied his thoughts these past 3 years? What do I really want? Suddenly, a text message interrupted Percival's train of thought. It was Billy. Percival, it's my birthday the day after tomorrow. I've booked a restaurant, don't forget to come. Percival frowned slightly and replied perfunctorily. The gardenias not far away wafted waves of delicate fragrance. Percival still didn't understand. On the way home, Cornelia stood there, her figure desolate. Her mind replayed the events of moments ago, a whirlwind of thoughts swirling in her heart. From beginning to end, Percival had only ever seen her as a substitute. All these days of entanglement were merely Percival still clinging to the resemblance of her face. Thinking of this, Cornelia felt even more how ridiculous these past 3 years had been. 3 years of deep affection had ultimately been misplaced. Cornelia let out a bitter laugh, unable to suppress the overwhelming bitterness in her heart. Suddenly, a gentle voice came from behind. "Cornelia, what are you doing here?" Cornelia turned around to see Victor smiling at her. Victor seemed to notice Cornelia's despondency, frowning slightly as he spoke softly. "Cornelia, if there's anything, you can talk to me." Cornelia smiled faintly, her voice gentle but somewhat weak. "Victor, don't worry, I'm fine." Victor gently patted Cornelia's shoulder, his tone deliberately light. He didn't pursue the topic further. "All right, we have a day off the day after tomorrow. To celebrate our reunion after such a long time, let me treat you to a meal." Cornelia smiled, her voice gentle. "Sounds good, but let me treat you instead. Consider it my chance to thank you for your help." Victor curved his lips into a faint smile, his voice soft. "All right, as you wish. All right, see you the day after tomorrow." With that, Cornelia waved her hand. Victor responded with a soft smile, watching Cornelia's retreating figure. His brows were slightly furrowed, knowing that Cornelia's current optimism was merely a forced smile. The only thing Victor could do now was to stay by Cornelia's side, accompanying her, waiting for her. Whenever she was ready to turn back, he would always be there. Inside the apartment, outside, night had already fallen. Bright stars still twinkled in the night sky. The occasional chirping of cicadas could still be heard. Cornelia sat quietly on the bed, gazing at everything outside the window. Thoughts swirl endlessly in my mind. Cornelia looked up, her gaze suddenly drawn to the star-shaped lamp in the corner. It was the first gift Percival gave her when they first met. Over these 3 years, Percival had given her many luxury items, but Cornelia treasured this star lamp the most. Even during Cornelia's moment of giving up on Percival, everything else was discarded by Cornelia. Only this star-shaped lamp, Cornelia still couldn't bear to throw away. Because all her feelings for Percival started with this star-shaped lamp. 3 years ago, in the hospital, Cornelia's grandpa lay on the hospital bed, gently stroking Cornelia's face. His loving face was pale, his voice weak. "Cornelia, Grandpa will be fine. If it really becomes too much, just let me go." Cornelia bit her lip hard, her eyes reddening, her body trembling uncontrollably, her voice choked with sobs. "Grandpa, please don't talk like that. Cornelia only has you left. Promise me you'll stay with me." "Okay." Cornelia ran alone to the hallway, struggling to hold back her tears, not wanting her grandfather to see. Back then, the Tennyson family faced financial shortages, and despite Grandpa's desperate efforts, he still couldn't help the conglomerate survive the crisis. Soon after, the Tennyson family's conglomerate went bankrupt because of this, even accumulating $30 million in debt. All those who were once close to the Tennyson family cut ties with Cornelia's grandpa one after another. Despite Cornelia's grandpa pleading everywhere, begging for their help, once this crisis was over, he would repay all his debts. But no one agreed to Cornelia's grandpa's requests, all avoiding him like the plague. Cornelia's grandpa was left isolated and helpless, consumed by worry and anxiety. This led to his physical condition deteriorating day by day, with old ailments flaring up again, ultimately landing him in the hospital, to repay debts, and more urgently, to cover her grandfather's medical expenses. Cornelia had no choice but to sell everything of value in the house, but even this was far from enough. Suddenly, a doctor approached, speaking in a low voice. "Hello, your grandfather's condition isn't very optimistic. We recommend scheduling the surgery as soon as possible, but the cost." Cornelia wiped her tears and stepped forward, tightly grasping the doctor's hand, her voice hoarse. "Doctor, please don't worry, just give me a few more days. I'll find a way to get the money as soon as possible." The doctor sighed, nodded, and said nothing more. On the street, Cornelia walked dejectedly down the street, desperately searching for work. Suddenly, Cornelia's gaze was drawn to a job posting. Qinghua nightclub is hiring waitstaff, meals and accommodation provided. Monthly salary of 20,000. Instantly, Cornelia's eyes lit up, and she walked in without hesitation. Although 20,000 used to be nothing to Cornelia, but now, Cornelia just wanted to solve her current predicament. "Are you sure you want to be a waitress?" At the door, a heavily made-up woman looked Cornelia up and down, her voice crisp. Cornelia didn't hesitate, her voice resolute. "Yes, I'm sure. All right. Come with me then." Seeing Cornelia's resolute words without the slightest hesitation, the woman didn't ask further and directly led Cornelia inside. Qinghua nightclub. Cornelia silently followed behind the woman, slightly raising her eyes to glance around. The surroundings were lavishly decorated, with dim lighting casting a faintly ambiguous atmosphere. Almost everyone around was men coming and going, accompanied by heavily made-up, scantily clad young women. Not far away, Cornelia could see greasy men with young girls clinging to them, their intimacy unmistakably suggestive. Cornelia was the sole heir of the Tennyson family. Raised from childhood with the utmost care and affection by her parents and grandfather, this was the first time Cornelia had ever been to such a place. In such a setting, Cornelia couldn't help but feel somewhat uneasy. The woman glanced back at Cornelia, her tone somewhat indifferent. You should also know what kind of place this is. The pay here is good, and the only thing we need to do is make sure the guests are satisfied and have a good time. Immediately after, the woman's crisp voice sounded again. The waiter's job is very simple. You just need to serve tea and deliver drinks. All basic service tasks. Understand? Yes, I understand. Cornelia nodded slightly. Although Cornelia had never been to such a place before, but regarding nightclubs, Cornelia had a general understanding. These venues are essentially places of entertainment for wealthy bosses, where young women serve as amusement for the men. Once upon a time, Cornelia loathed these places. But she never imagined she would end up working as a waitress here. But there was no other choice. Cornelia had no options left. She needed the money. Her grandfather was still waiting in the hospital, and Cornelia had no other family left but him. Suddenly, the woman came to a halt. She pointed to a heavily made-up young girl nearby, her voice crisp and clear. All right, take her to change clothes, tidy up, and then get ready to start work. With that, the woman left. All right, come with me. The young girl smiled, taking Cornelia by the hand and leading her to the dressing room. Cornelia nodded slightly, raising her eyes a little. Before her stood a young girl who appeared to be about the same age as Cornelia. Cornelia felt somewhat puzzled as to why such a beautiful girl would work in a place like this. But then again, hadn't she herself been driven to desperation before choosing to work here? Cornelia, having lived 20 years as a pampered young lady, naturally wouldn't understand the daily struggles of ordinary people. Come to think of it, among these girls, there must be some in similar circumstances to hers. If it weren't for this, how many girls would truly willingly choose this job? At this thought, Cornelia couldn't help but feel a bit melancholic, and Cornelia experienced for the first time the helplessness of ordinary people. Soon, Cornelia changed into her work clothes, and the young girl applied makeup to Cornelia and tied up her hair. Cornelia looked at herself in the mirror, wearing a black bodycon dress with heavy makeup, appearing very mature and sexy. This kind of outfit made Cornelia feel quite uncomfortable all over. Fortunately, Cornelia's usual job was just serving drinks and cleaning. After work, Cornelia would change out of her clothes and wipe off her makeup before going to the hospital. Cornelia knew that if her grandfather found out, he would surely blame himself. Her grandfather would never allow Cornelia to work in such a place just to earn money for his medical expenses, and so, Cornelia spent her days shuttling between work and the hospital. Though exhausted, at least it solved the immediate crisis at hand. At this moment, Cornelia was still unaware that her bond with Percival also began from here. Time flew by in the blink of an eye. Cornelia had already been working here for nearly 3 months, in order to raise the surgery fees as quickly as possible. After work every day, Cornelia would take on extra part-time jobs to supplement her daily expenses. Over these 3 months, Cornelia seemed to have gradually grown accustomed to the life of an ordinary person. It seemed like everything was slowly getting better. As long as her grandfather was still around, her world wasn't quite so bleak. Qinghua nightclub. Cornelia was busy, delivering drinks one moment and cleaning the next. At first, Cornelia wasn't used to it, but now, Cornelia has gotten much better. After all, as long as she does what she's supposed to do every day and earns money properly, that's enough. Suddenly, a young woman's clear voice rang out. Cornelia, could you go help deliver drinks to VIP room 513 over there? After a pause, the young woman seemed somewhat uneasy and added another reminder. By the way, the guests in that room are VIP clients of ours, so please provide good service. Cornelia nodded gently, her voice soft. Understood. Don't worry. After speaking, Cornelia carefully carried the drinks over. Outside the private room, Cornelia knocked on the door. It was very noisy inside, but faint laughter of men and women could still be heard. Cornelia knocked for a while, but there was no response. Helpless, Cornelia had no choice but to gently push the door open. Inside the private room, inside sat 5 or 6 burly men, each holding a young and beautiful girl in their arms, under the flickering lights. Men and women laughed and flirted, creating an ambiguous atmosphere. Cornelia kept her head deeply bowed, thinking to quickly deliver the drinks and leave as soon as possible. She slightly raised her eyes, but her gaze was drawn to the man sitting nearby. This man seemed different from the other men in the private room. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit, his demeanor elegant. There were no other women by his side. He was simply sitting quietly alone, under the dim light. Although the man's face was unclear, one could faintly make out his distinctive profile. The man smoked a cigarette, his brows slightly furrowed, as if he was disgusted with everything around him. Lost in thought, "Waiter, bring the drinks quickly." Suddenly, a greasy man nearby, seemingly drunk, shouted impatiently, "Coming, coming." Cornelia finally snapped out of it and hurriedly carried it over with great care. Then the drunken man pointed at Cornelia, his voice ringing out again, "You, pour me some wine." Cornelia responded softly, bending down to pour the wine. This wasn't the first time Cornelia had encountered such a situation. After all, it was just pouring wine. Cornelia didn't want to cause any trouble, so she always finished serving as quickly as possible and left promptly. In such settings, Cornelia had no desire to linger any longer than necessary. Suddenly, the drunken man lurched violently and bumped right into Cornelia's hand. Cornelia had no time to react, and the wine in her hand poured directly onto the man's head. The wine trickled down the man's face. Instantly, the drunken man's face twisted in fury as he grabbed Cornelia's wrist tightly, shouting, "Are you blind?" Cornelia panicked slightly and quickly bowed in apology. "I'm sorry, boss, I didn't mean to. Let me clean that for you." As she spoke, Cornelia picked up a towel to wipe it clean. Gazing at the graceful woman before him, the man reached out and lifted Cornelia's chin. After getting a clear look at the woman's face, the man revealed a lewd smile and reached out to touch Cornelia's leg. Cornelia was momentarily stunned, seeing the man approach. She instinctively took a step back. The man smirked with ill intent, his voice dripping with mockery. "You spilled wine all over me. Shouldn't you apologize properly? Let me touch you, and I'll let it slide." As he spoke, the man was about to reach out again. Realizing the situation was dire, Cornelia didn't hesitate and turned to leave. But the man tightly grabbed Cornelia, holding her captive in his arms, his tone mocking. "Don't worry, you're so beautiful. I won't treat you poorly." After he finished speaking, the surrounding crowd burst into laughter, all watching as if it were a show. It seemed everything here was taken for granted. As long as there was money, they couldn't care less. The man's scent couldn't help but make Cornelia feel nauseated. Cornelia struggled desperately, her eyes slightly red, her voice hoarse with shouting, "Let go of me, have some self-respect." The drunk man saw that Cornelia wasn't giving him face and instantly lost interest. The man frowned, his face full of disdain, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "How ungrateful." Having said that, the man raised his hand to strike. Cornelia, seeing that resistance was futile, she could only tightly close her eyes, waiting for the hand to fall. "Wait." Suddenly, a deep voice broke the clamor of the scene. Recognizing that person, the crowd quickly fell silent, not daring to speak another word. Cornelia slightly raised her eyes. Standing before her was that somewhat different man. The man tightly gripped the drunken man's hand that was about to fall, his gaze fixed firmly on the intoxicated figure before him. Frowning slightly, his voice was low, "This woman is mine." Seeing Percival step forward, the drunken man naturally didn't dare to offend him and hurriedly fawned with a flattering smile. "All right, since Mr. Percival fancies it, I naturally wouldn't dare to covet it." After speaking, Percival directly tossed out a large sum of cash, his voice dripping with disdain. "Consider this compensation from me on her behalf." "Enough." The drunken man naturally knew when to quit while he was ahead, his voice turning obsequious. "Mr. Percival, you're too polite. This is a trivial matter. I'll be on my way now." With that, he picked up the money and scurried out in disgrace. Sensing the tense atmosphere, the others didn't dare linger for even a moment and quickly dispersed. Cornelia finally came to her senses, her voice hoarse. "Thank you, sir. I'll take my leave now." The scenes from moments ago left Cornelia still shaken, eager to leave quickly. Suddenly, the man grabbed Cornelia's hands and pulled her back into his embrace. Cornelia was momentarily caught off guard. She slightly raised her eyes, only to meet the man's profound gaze. Cornelia finally saw clearly that under the light, the man's face was strikingly handsome. They stood so close to each other that they could even hear each other's heartbeat. Cornelia only felt her body growing warm, her cheeks flushing red. But when Cornelia's face came into view, Percival's eyes suddenly lit up. The woman before him looked so much like Ethel. Before Cornelia could regain her composure, Percival's deep voice sounded once more. "After this, you'll follow me. Name any conditions you have." The man's tone was firm, as if he didn't give Cornelia any chance to refuse. Cornelia was momentarily stunned, faced with these words from a stranger. Her first instinct was to refuse, but then she thought again. Her grandfather was still waiting in the hospital. Relying solely on herself to raise the money was far too slow. Cornelia looked at the man before her, who seemed different from the others. Gritting her teeth, she spoke in a hoarse voice, "All right, as long as you can help me pay off my debts and raise money for my grandfather's treatment, I'm willing to follow you." She thought all her problems would be solved. But then the hospital sent a notice that her grandfather was critically ill. In the hospital, Cornelia rushed over in a panic, only for the doctor to shake his head with a helpless tone. "I'm sorry, Miss Cornelia, we did our best. Your grandfather's condition has been deteriorating, but he didn't want you to worry, so he asked us to keep it from you." The doctor gently patted Cornelia on the shoulder, pointing towards the hospital room, speaking softly, "Go say your goodbyes to him." Instantly, Cornelia's heart sank heavily, her body trembling uncontrollably. On the sickbed, Cornelia's grandpa lay weakly, catching sight of Cornelia's figure, forcing a smile with effort. She wiped away the Cornelia tears at the corners of her eyes, her face full of tenderness. "Darling, I'm sorry, Grandpa can't stay with you anymore. Don't blame Grandpa. After I'm gone, you must live well." In an instant, Cornelia could no longer hold back her tears, tightly gripping Cornelia's grandpa hand, sobbing, "Grandpa, don't worry." Before Cornelia could finish speaking, Cornelia's grandpa peacefully closed his eyes. In an instant, Cornelia's facade of strength completely crumbled. Cornelia trembled uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. All of this was too much for Cornelia to bear. It felt as though she had been losing loved ones since childhood. "At the age of 5, both of my parents passed away in a car accident. Grandfather was overwhelmed with grief, but for the sake of the Tennyson family, and for Cornelia to grow up well, he had to force himself to carry on alone. For the past 15 years, Grandfather single-handedly supported the Tennyson Family Corporation, yet he managed to protect Cornelia exceptionally well. Now that Grandfather is old, Cornelia only hopes that she can become his support. But Grandfather ultimately didn't live to see the day when I could shelter him from life's storms." Cornelia sobbed, tightly wrapping her arms around herself. In the blink of an eye, it seemed as if the world had shrunk to just Cornelia alone, with no one left to lean on. Suddenly, a gentle voice reached her ears. "Don't be sad. I'll stay with you from now on." Cornelia slightly raised her eyes, vaguely seeing Percival gazing at her with tender affection. Then, Percival handed Cornelia a star-shaped lamp, speaking softly, "If you're ever afraid in the darkness, let this star lamp keep you company, as if it were your family." Cornelia looked at Percival before her, unable to hold back all her grievances any longer. At that moment, Percival was like Cornelia's ray of light in life, only, Cornelia didn't know that at that moment, Percival was merely because Cornelia resembled Ethel. Seeing Cornelia so distressed, Percival seemed to recall Ethel, and his heart ached a little. So at that time, Percival was merely using Cornelia as a shadow to comfort his own Ethel, to make up for his own regrets. It was also from that moment Cornelia fell in love with this man and devoted herself entirely to him. Even though Cornelia understood, Percival only saw her as a substitute for Ethel. But Cornelia didn't care, especially during those times when she had no one to rely on. It was Percival who appeared and illuminated her life, and Cornelia believed that she could eventually warm Percival's heart. Inside the apartment, a chorus of cicadas brought Cornelia's memories back to the present. Cornelia gazed at the night outside the window and turned on the starry light. The dim room instantly brightened. Cornelia, her eyes slightly red, her voice choked with emotion. "Mom, Dad, Grandpa, I miss you." Looking back on these 3 years, everything felt as if it were just yesterday, but now, everything has changed. In the end, nothing turned out as she had hoped. At this thought, Cornelia let out a bitter laugh, her voice hoarse. "But it's okay, I'm still Cornelia, Uasheen Restaurant." Billy was holding Percival's arm, her face was full of smiles, her voice gentle. "Percival, I'm really happy you could come out with me today." Faced with Billy's enthusiasm, Percival remained expressionless. He truly had no mood for this charade. But there was no way around it. Some things just couldn't be avoided. Percival casually waved his hand, and immediately, a waiter brought over a bouquet of roses. Then, Percival took out a card and handed it to Billy, his voice low. "Happy birthday. I don't know what you like, so buy whatever you want yourself." Billy looked at the roses before her with some surprise. After all, Percival had been avoiding her at every turn since their marriage. Even meeting once is difficult. If not for the excuse of a birthday, Who knows when we get to see Percival again? Originally thought Percival didn't care, but looking now, Percival still has a heart. Thinking of this, Billy's face was filled with happiness, her voice gentle. Percival, you know, I don't care about gifts, having you with me is enough. Billy gazed with deep affection. Percival didn't even glance at Billy, his tone dismissive. All right, let's eat. At this moment, Percival was in no mood at all, his mind completely occupied by Cornelia's words from that day. Just want to quickly end this farcical performance. Well, let's eat. Seeing Percival give no response, Billy felt somewhat disappointed and displeased, but didn't say anything more. Facing Percival's attitude, Billy had long grown accustomed to it, but it didn't matter, as long as she was happy. Although Billy knew that Percival had always held someone special in his heart, but Ethel had passed away 3 years ago, Billy didn't mind it so much anymore. After all, they're already married, and familiarity can breed affection over time. As for the mistress rumor spread during that engagement banquet, Percival publicly explained it in front of everyone. Billy naturally wouldn't believe such gossip. Suddenly, Percival slightly raised his gaze and once again saw that familiar figure, yet the scene before him was so glaring that it filled Percival with immense displeasure. Not far away, Cornelia stood wearing a blue miniskirt, her makeup meticulously applied. By her side was an unfamiliar man. Cornelia was all smiles, the two conversing merrily as if intimately close. Witnessing the scene before him, Percival couldn't help but feel a surge of anger in his heart. It had been so long. Cornelia hadn't shown him such a smile on her face. Once upon a time, such a smile had belonged to him alone, but now, Cornelia wouldn't even spare him a glance, let alone get along so harmoniously with another man. Watching the pair not far away, Percival couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. Had Cornelia truly moved on? Did she fall for someone else so quickly? At this thought, Percival couldn't help but feel a hint of panic, mixed with a touch of resentment. Billy seemed to notice Percival's unease and grew concerned. Percival, what's wrong? Is something bothering you? Percival finally snapped out of it, hurriedly concealing the emotion in his eyes. Frowning slightly, his voice was low. Nothing. I just suddenly thought about a company project. It's quite tricky. Percival averted his gaze, forcibly suppressing the turmoil within, though at this moment, Percival desperately wanted to rush forward and confront Cornelia. Billy looked at Percival before her, a flicker of heartache in her eyes, her voice soft. Percival, don't overwork yourself. Percival didn't even lift his head, his voice indifferent. Eat up, I'll take you back after, then I'll be at the company tonight. Billy felt a bit down, but didn't say anything more. Meanwhile, not far away, Cornelia and Victor were still chatting happily, completely unaware of Percival's gaze from this side, at the apartment building entrance. The setting sun cast its glow upon the figures of the two, gazing at the sunset in the sky. Cornelia couldn't help but sigh. Victor, this sunset is truly beautiful, don't you think? Victor smiled gently, his voice soft. Yes, it's beautiful. Bathed in the glow of the sunset, gazing at Cornelia before me, still as radiant and captivating as remembered. Cornelia, Victor couldn't help but softly call out. Cornelia turned around, her face full of smiles, her voice gentle. What's wrong? Looking at the Cornelia before him, for a moment, Victor found it hard to suppress the emotions in his heart. Victor seemed unsure how to begin. After a moment of silence, Victor made what seemed like a resolute decision, his voice hoarse. Cornelia, we're good friends, right? As the words left his mouth, Victor bit his lip, visibly frustrated. Cornelia seemed not to notice Victor's mood, gently patting Victor on the shoulder. Her tone was light. Of course, we're very good friends, Good friends, Victor responded with a smile, his eyes slightly reddening as he couldn't help feeling a bit down. Looking at the Cornelia before him, Victor took a deep breath and spoke with determination. Cornelia, remember, I'll always be here. Cornelia smiled gently, her voice warm. Okay, I got it, thank you. Victor shook his head with a smile, his tone deliberately light. All right, let's head back. Cornelia responded softly and waved her hand. Watching Cornelia's receding figure, Victor couldn't help but feel a pang of bitterness in his heart. Victor ultimately lacked the courage to say those words. He knew it wasn't the right time yet, but it's okay, at least in Cornelia's world, there's still a him. Being friends is fine, being lovers is fine too. Victor has always only wanted to stay by Cornelia's side, no matter whether Cornelia turns back to see him or not. If Cornelia is willing, he will protect Cornelia for a lifetime. If Cornelia is unwilling, then Victor will still stand behind her forever. Unless he sees Cornelia's happiness with his own eyes, Victor will not leave. Not far away, Percival sat quietly in the car, smoking. Every moment of what had just happened was clearly visible to him. Watching the two of them being so intimate, Percival felt a pang of bitterness and anger in his heart. Percival had bloodshot eyes, his mind filled with scenes of the past 3 years with Cornelia, recalling the memories of the past. Percival found himself unconsciously curling his lips into a faint smile, gazing in Cornelia's direction. Percival pondered deeply. After a long while, Percival seemed to have thought of something. He got out of the car and walked toward the apartment. Percival was unwilling to give up. He still wanted to ask Cornelia again. Inside the apartment, Cornelia sat quietly on the sofa, lost in thought. Victor's thoughts. Cornelia could sense. She understood Victor's kindness. But now, Victor to Cornelia, Cornelia felt more gratitude and friendship. Cornelia couldn't yet give Victor any response. After 3 years, Cornelia still couldn't completely let go of her feelings for Percival. Cornelia knew that in her heart. She still loved Percival. Cornelia wouldn't allow herself to trample on another person's feelings. Suddenly, a knock at the door broke the silence of the room. Cornelia opened the door, only to feel her heart sink once again. Outside stood the face she longed to see yet dreaded to face. She saw Percival with a hint of anger on his face, his voice low and heavy. "Seems you really don't want to see me, you've even changed the lock." At this moment, Cornelia had neither the desire nor the energy to engage in any further disputes with Percival. Looking at Percival before her, Cornelia wore an indifferent expression, her tone flat. "What do you want?" Percival, however, didn't mince words, frowning slightly as he spoke in a low voice. "Who is that man?" Cornelia was momentarily taken aback, feeling somewhat puzzled. Seeing Cornelia remain silent, Percival mistakenly thought Cornelia was protecting Victor, frowning with a sharp gaze. He emphasized each word once again. "I'll ask you one more time. Who is the man you had dinner with, the one who sent you home?" Cornelia only then realized, finding it somewhat amusing. Her gaze was indifferent, her voice icy. "None of your business." After speaking, Cornelia intended to close the door. Percival instead barged through the doorway, turning to pin Cornelia against the wall. With a loud bang, the door was slammed shut. Cornelia was startled, but her gaze at Percival remained cold. Her voice indifferent. "What are you making a fuss about?" Facing the indifferent Cornelia, Percival couldn't help but recall scenes of Cornelia with another man. At this thought, Percival felt an inexplicable irritation growing in his heart. His grip on Cornelia's hand tightened slightly as his voice turned low. "Cornelia, don't test my patience." Cornelia winced slightly, her voice icy. "Mr. Percival, don't forget, there's nothing between us anymore. My affairs are none of your concern." Hearing this, Percival felt a surge of anger, his eyes turning crimson as he growled in a low voice. "Cornelia, what? Have you really found yourself a sugar daddy? When did you become so cheap?" In an instant, Cornelia's heart sank heavily. Looking at Percival before her, Cornelia couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow in her heart. Her eyes slightly reddened, her voice hoarse. "Yes, he repaid my debt for me. He is my benefactor. What does any of this have to do with you, Mr. Percival?" In an instant, Percival's body froze, gazing at the Cornelia before him. Scenes from the past flooded his mind once more. Percival's eyes turned bloodshot as he growled in a low voice. "Fine, Cornelia, have you also forgotten? I told you, you're my woman, and I won't let you go." With that, Percival scooped Cornelia up in his arms. He then tossed Cornelia directly onto the bed. Cornelia, startled, tried to get up and run. Percival simply dragged Cornelia back, turning around. He pinned Cornelia beneath him. Facing Percival, Cornelia grew flustered, her voice hoarse. "Percival, can't you just let me go?" Percival had completely lost his rationality at this moment. His eyes bloodshot and his voice was low. "No." Cornelia only then realized that she shouldn't have provoked him. After saying this, Percival directly leaned down over her. Cornelia struggled desperately, but her hands were tightly restrained by Percival. In an instant, Cornelia's clothes were torn open by Percival. Cornelia couldn't help but cry out, her voice hoarse. "No, let me go." But at this moment, Percival had lost all reason, like a wild beast wanting to devour the Cornelia before him. Gazing at the exposed skin and that familiar face before him, this time, Percival no longer mistook the Cornelia before him for Ethel. Looking at the Cornelia before him, he recalled everything that had happened during this time. Percival felt nothing but irritation in his heart. Paying no heed to Cornelia's resistance, he pressed down upon her. In an instant, Cornelia felt a sharp ache beneath her, a wave of intense pain washing over her. Cornelia bit her lip hard, struggling to keep silent as tears welled up in her eyes. Percival vented his emotions on Cornelia without restraint. All the resentment, bitterness, and rage that had built up inside him poured out in this moment, remembering these things. Percival's movements beneath her grew even rougher. Cornelia bit her lip tightly, her hands struggling incessantly, her voice hoarse. "Stop, it hurts." Percival instead leaned down and kissed Cornelia on the lips. In an instant, Cornelia felt a blur, as if she had returned to the past, but soon, Cornelia snapped out of this emotion, opened her mouth and bit down hard on Percival's lips. Percival winced in pain, his movements beneath becoming even rougher. Cornelia had tears welling in her eyes, biting her lips hard and gripping the sheets tightly. She was determined not to let out another sound. It was unclear how much time had passed. Percival finally ended this bout of intimacy. Cornelia lay quietly on the bed, tightly wrapping the blanket around her body. At this moment, Cornelia had no strength left. Only feeling a dull ache below, Percival touched the corner of his mouth, glanced at Cornelia beside him, and spoke in a low voice. "Your temper has really grown." Cornelia remained silent, turning her head away. Percival knew that Cornelia must be even angrier with him now. After a long silence, Cornelia finally spoke slowly, her eyes slightly red and her voice hoarse. "Percival, in your eyes, am I really such a despicable person?" For a moment, Percival was somewhat stunned, coming to his senses. Only then did he suddenly realize that his earlier words had been somewhat excessive. Percival instinctively wanted to explain, but before Percival could finish, Cornelia interrupted him. Cornelia slightly raised her eyes, and their gazes met. Cornelia looked at the Percival before her, her eyes slightly moist, her voice hoarse. "Percival, in your heart, am I never as good as anyone else?" Cornelia had tears welling up in her eyes, her voice choked with emotion. "Percival, I truly don't want to be anyone's shadow anymore, nor do I want to be your hidden mistress who can't be seen in public." Cornelia fell silent for a moment, gazing at the Percival before her, unable to hold back her tears any longer. "After today, can we part ways amicably?" Percival was momentarily stunned, looking at the pitiful Cornelia before him. "I couldn't help but feel a pang of heartache." Percival opened his mouth, wanting to say something more, but no words could escape his throat. Seeing Cornelia's tears at the corner of her eyes, Percival couldn't resist the urge to reach out and wipe them away for Cornelia, but Cornelia instinctively turned her head to the other side, seemingly unwilling and reluctant to let Percival touch her anymore. Percival pressed his lips together, unable to suppress the bitterness in his heart. Percival said nothing more, silently put on his clothes, and gently closed the door. He understood that everything he had done had left Cornelia heartbroken. But as for Cornelia's words about parting ways amicably from now on, Percival knew clearly that he couldn't do it. Looking at Cornelia, Percival actually had many things he wanted to say in his heart, but Percival didn't know what he should say. Percival understood what Cornelia wanted, but the current him couldn't provide it. Sterling family conglomerate. Billy was holding a pineapple cake she made herself, her face beaming with joy. She knew that Percival's favorite was pineapple cake. To make Percival happy, Billy always found various ways to cheer Percival up. It's just that Percival always responds very perfunctorily. Today is her birthday, and she thought Percival would come home. Percival was still busy with work. Billy was unhappy in her heart, but she still respected Percival. Some time ago, because of Percival's indifference, Billy felt a bit upset and stopped taking the initiative, originally thinking that after a few days of coldness, Percival would come looking for them, but the result was that Percival never did, still busy with their own affairs. As if their presence made no difference at all, Billy didn't want to give up. Since Percival isn't taking the initiative, she'll have to do it herself. If Percival has no time, then she'll make time to find him herself. Inside the office, but the room was empty. Billy felt puzzled. "Percival, didn't you say you'd be working overtime at the company tonight?" Billy walked around, but the quiet office still showed no sign of anyone. No one answered the phone calls, and there were no replies to the messages either. With no other choice, Billy had to call the assistant Gary. After a long while, the call was finally answered. Then came the voice of a young man from the other end of the line. "Mrs. Billy, what can I do for you?" Billy had an indifferent look in her eyes, her voice icy cold. "Gary, Mr. Percival is working overtime at the company." On the other end of the phone, Billy's voice was heard, sounding somewhat flustered but still speaking calmly. "Yes, Mr. Percival is currently working overtime at the company." Upon hearing this, Billy frowned slightly, clenched her hands tightly, her voice low in tone oppressive. "Gary, I'll ask you one more time, where is Mr. Percival?" Hearing the unusual tone in Billy's voice, The young man on the other end of the phone also began to stammer, but he still covered for Percival. Miss Billy, Mr. Percival, he is indeed busy. Seeing the secretary still unwilling to tell the truth, Billy's face showed signs of anger. Billy understood that Percival was hiding something from her. Suddenly, Billy seemed to think of something. Tightly clutching the box of pineapple cakes in her hands, Billy frowned tightly, her voice low and stern. Fine, if you won't tell me, then I'll go find Percival myself. After hanging up the phone, Billy headed straight for Percival's private residence. For some reason, Billy couldn't shake off an absurd thought in her mind, that is to say, Percival's matter is indeed true. At this thought, Billy frowned slightly and couldn't help but clench her fists. Billy didn't want to believe this fact, so she still intended to ask Percival directly what exactly was being kept from her. Inside the villa, Percival returned home desolately. Scenes from the encounter with Cornelia kept replaying in his mind. Cornelia's words couldn't help but Percival feel somewhat moved. Moreover, just now, Percival didn't even see Cornelia as Ethel's shadow. He seemed genuinely jealous just now. Cornelia was with another man, which is why he lost control of his emotions. Percival didn't quite understand himself, uncertain about Cornelia, what his true feelings for her were at this moment. Suddenly, a somewhat urgent phone ringtone sounded. It shattered the tranquility of the villa. On the other end of the phone, the assistant Gary sounded slightly flustered. Mr. Percival, you finally answered the phone. Just now, Mrs. Billy called asking about you. I suppose Mrs. Billy went to the company looking for you, but you weren't there. She's probably on her way to find you now. Percival frowned slightly, his voice low. Okay, I understand. After hanging up, Percival frowned and remained silent. He knew Billy would definitely demand a clear explanation from him, but it didn't matter. As long as Billy hadn't discovered Cornelia's existence yet, he could continue to brush it off. After a long while, the villa's gate slowly opened. Seeing Percival's figure, Billy seemed to let out a sigh of relief. Percival slowly raised his eyes, meeting Billy's gaze. There Billy stood blankly at the doorway, a trace of loneliness flickering in her eyes. Billy slowly stepped forward, gazing at the still emotionless Percival. A bitter feeling welled up in her heart, yet she managed to maintain a smile, her voice soft and gentle. Percival, I went to look for you earlier. Why weren't you at the company? Percival remained expressionless, slightly furrowing his brows with a low voice. I'm a bit tired, so I came back after finishing up. Billy naturally found it hard to believe and couldn't help but speak up. I thought you. Suddenly, Billy seemed to think of something and swallowed the words in her throat. Since Percival was at the villa, perhaps it wasn't as she had imagined. If she were to confront Percival without any evidence, it would likely upset Percival again. Billy still had some doubts. But looking at the visibly exhausted Percival before her, Billy couldn't help but show a hint of heartache in her eyes. Her voice softening, Percival, if you're tired, you can tell me. I can share the burden with you. Percival naturally knew that Billy had doubts in her heart, but fortunately, Cornelia's matter was still unknown to Billy. I had to make up an excuse to brush it off for now. Percival waved his hand, his gaze indifferent and his voice low. It's fine, it's too late. I didn't want to disturb you. Did you need something so late at night? Billy finally calmed down a little. After all, it wasn't what she had feared, and she breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. Coming back to her senses, she then remembered the box of pineapple cakes in her hand. Billy hurriedly handed it over, her face beaming with a smile, her voice gentle. Percival, I made this myself. I know you'll like it. Percival slightly raised his eyes. He saw Billy holding an exquisitely packaged box of pastries in her hand. Each pineapple cake inside was crafted with great delicacy. Percival could easily tell that Billy had put a lot of effort into them. Percival took the box of pineapple cakes, his tone no longer as stiff, his voice calm. Thank you, it's getting late. Billy, you should rest here for tonight. Hearing this, Billy was pleasantly surprised, thinking Percival had finally accepted them. Their heart couldn't help but flutter with excitement, their voice gentle. Percival, let's rest together. Percival declined again, his voice low. I still have some work to finish. I'll try not to disturb you. I'll be staying in the guest room tonight. Billy felt a pang of disappointment but responded softly before leaving the living room. Billy had already anticipated Percival's refusal. It was just that for the first time, Percival showed a hint of warmth in his eyes, which gave a glimmer of hope. But it's okay, at least it's not as bad as imagined. Then let's give Percival some more time. Soon, the spacious villa fell silent once again. Percival watched Billy's retreating figure and finally let out a deep sigh. This little storm had been successfully smoothed over by him. Percival looked at the box of pineapple cakes in his hand, his mind flooded with countless thoughts. The warmth in his eyes just now wasn't solely because of Billy, but more because it reminded him of the past Cornelia. Percival understood that Billy harbored affection for him, which was why Billy repeatedly tolerated Percival's coldness. But if Billy were to learn the truth, Billy would surely hate him. Percival could recognize Billy's sincerity, but this arranged marriage meant something different to him. It was merely a marriage of convenience from the start. He felt Billy not a shred of affection. At this thought, Percival felt Billy a twinge of guilt in his heart, but at least he hadn't taken her innocence. Percival thought that when the time was right, he would discuss the matter of separation with Billy. Compared to Billy, Percival might be more concerned about Cornelia at this moment. In his days just now, Percival seemed to catch a glimpse of Cornelia's shadow in Billy. Recalling the past, Cornelia would also go to great lengths to win Percival's favor. Just these, Percival never cared about before. As for Cornelia, what she had done for Percival, Percival had no recollection in his mind. At the company, Cornelia was busy working, yet his mind was filled with endless thoughts. He didn't know if it was because of the words he had said or because of Victor. Since that day of madness, over the past week, Percival hadn't contacted her again. Cornelia still couldn't help thinking about him, but she forced herself to suppress her emotions. That day, Cornelia had said some things that were indeed Cornelia's true feelings from the heart, but that final line about parting on good terms, if it is said that Percival cannot do it, then Cornelia is no different. To say those words, Cornelia mustered up immense courage. Ever since realizing that in Percival's heart, she could never compare to Ethel, not even to a woman devoid of any emotions, and thus, an innocent life was lost. From that moment, Cornelia had completely given up hope. Not wanting to have anything to do with Percival was true, and wanting to stay far away from Percival was also true. But 3 years of emotions, Cornelia couldn't just let go so easily. Cornelia, there's an interview over here for you to handle. Suddenly, the supervisor's crisp voice pulled Cornelia's thoughts back to reality. Cornelia snapped out of it, her voice calm. All right, where is the interview? Then, the supervisor's crisp voice rang out again. But the very next second, the supervisor's response made Cornelia's heart sink heavily. The Trevor family's group has a new product launch event, featuring the Trevor family's eldest daughter Billy. Hearing this, Cornelia froze in place. Hearing that jarring name again, Cornelia still couldn't control the emotions surging within her. Despite having repeatedly warned herself in her heart, she should remain indifferent to everything related to Percival. But when whispers of Percival reached her ears once more, Cornelia found herself unable to stay unaffected. Cornelia frowned slightly, her eyes brimming with turbulent emotions. Cornelia couldn't help but feel a surge of jealousy and resentment in her heart. Hearing Billy's name again, Cornelia's mind kept replaying the scenes from the wedding day. At the thought of this, Cornelia felt as if a voice inside her was saying, "See, you loved him for 3 years, stayed by his side for 3 years, acted as a substitute for 3 years, even sacrificed a child, yet the man you deeply loved still didn't glance back at you." Every time she thought of this, Cornelia couldn't help but feel a pang of bitterness in her heart. After a moment of silence, Cornelia finally came to her senses, her gaze indifferent and her voice low. "Understood. I'll go." Cornelia understood that these were the realities she had to face, since she had already decided to start living properly again. These hurdles she found difficult to overcome. Ultimately, she had to cross this hurdle herself, no matter how difficult the process was. Sterling family conglomerate, Percival was handling the affairs of the group, his face full of exhaustion. Since that day, Percival never went to see Cornelia again. Percival knew that Cornelia wouldn't want to see him, and he also realized that it was time for him to seriously consider what kind of feelings he truly had for Cornelia. Suddenly, the secretary Gary walked in, his voice low. "Mr. Percival, Mrs. Billy asked me to confirm with you again whether you will attend the press conference." Percival frowned slightly, somewhat absent-minded, waved his hand, and spoke in a low voice. "No, thanks, just tell them I have other things to attend to." The assistant hesitated and remained silent for a while. Then the young man's voice spoke up again. "Mr. Percival, Mrs. Billy meant that there will be many reporters present today, and she really hopes you can attend, so, reporter." Percival grew somewhat impatient and instinctively wanted to refuse. Suddenly, a glint flashed in his eyes. Percival, as if he had thought of something, suddenly intrigued, his voice turned low. "Will she go?" The assistant Gary naturally understood Percival's meaning and said no more. After glancing at Percival, he simply gave a slight nod. It seemed like a satisfactory response had been received. Percival slightly raised his eyes. a flicker of delight flashing through his gaze, his voice calm. "All right, go ahead, no need to tell Mrs. Billy." Percival didn't think much of it, merely feeling that getting to see Cornelia from afar would be enough. Trevor family group press conference. Billy wore an elegant beige gown, carrying herself with grace. The venue was crowded with reporters, facing their barrage of questions. Billy remained as composed as Percival, calmly introducing the company's new products one by one. Cornelia lingered in the crowd, staring blankly at Billy on the stage. Under the dazzling lights, Billy appeared so radiant. Cornelia looked down at herself and couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. Billy was so dazzling, compared to her. Perhaps in Percival's heart, Billy was indeed the more suitable person to stand by his side. Billy is the eldest daughter of the Trevor family. There are many ways she can assist Percival, but she is just a small-time journalist, and compared to Billy, she feels so insignificant. Thinking of this, Cornelia couldn't help but feel a pang of bitterness in her heart. On stage, Billy glanced around, but the figure she had been hoping to see still hadn't appeared. Facing the barrage of questions from numerous reporters, Billy managed to force a faint smile, yet a trace of desolation couldn't help but flicker in those eyes. Despite having known all along that Percival wouldn't come, Billy still clung to a sliver of hope. Suddenly, amidst the bustling crowd, a crisp voice pierced through the clamor of the scene. "Mrs. Billy, may I ask if you're happily married to Mr. Percival?" Instantly, the room fell silent. Clearly, everyone was very interested in this topic. Billy seemed momentarily stunned. Quite obviously, faced with this question, Billy was somewhat caught off guard. Billy slightly raised her eyes and looked at the person who had asked the question in the crowd. Her gaze happened to meet Cornelia's. The one who had just asked that question was none other than Cornelia. Cornelia clutched the manuscript tightly in her hand, her heart racing. Cornelia felt somewhat dazed. She didn't understand why she had asked that question in public either. Deep down, I already knew the answer, but just now, listening to the reporters' questions about Percival and Billy, Cornelia felt a pang of sorrow and couldn't help but speak up. Rather than saying those words provoked Cornelia, rather, Cornelia wanted to ask in person, to completely rid herself of any lingering illusions about Percival and move on. Their gazes met. Looking into Cornelia's eyes, Billy couldn't tell if it was an illusion or just her intuition. She always felt that Cornelia looked at her with a somewhat different gaze. Since Billy married Percival, there have been constant murmurs from the outside world about their relationship. Such questions, Billy has encountered quite a few, but every time, Billy would brush them off with a vague remark, unwilling to say much about her and Percival's affairs. But this time, Billy stared at the Cornelia before her, momentarily stunned. Yes, was she truly happy? After a moment of silence, Billy pursed her lips, about to speak. Suddenly, Billy seemed to notice something, her eyes gleaming, her voice calm and gentle. "Percival and I are very happy, and today, Percival has specially come to support my launch event. Everyone, please welcome him." After saying this, Billy turned slightly and waved her hand. The crowd looked over and saw, under the lights, Percival appearing before everyone in a well-tailored suit. Percival looked somewhat puzzled, only to see Billy walking over with a beaming smile. Intimately linking arms with Percival, the two walked intimately onto the stage under the gaze of the crowd. Watching the affectionate pair before her, Cornelia couldn't help but feel a pang of bitterness in her heart. Billy smiled gently, raising her eyes to glance at Cornelia with a soft voice. "As everyone can see, Percival and I share a deep bond, so let there be no more rumors." Percival looked up and finally saw Cornelia standing before him. In an instant, Percival felt a flicker of panic in his heart. He had only intended to steal a glance at Cornelia, never expecting things to turn out like this. Cornelia gazed at Percival, her eyes slightly reddened, and let out a bitter laugh. He turned and disappeared into the crowd. Percival wanted to chase after him, but under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Percival knew he couldn't do so. Outside the press conference venue, the crowd at the scene finally dispersed. Gazing into the distance, Percival seemed somewhat distracted. Billy affectionately held Percival's arm, her voice gentle. "Percival, why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Percival came to his senses but withdrew his arm, frowning slightly. His voice was low. "It's fine. But let's keep a low profile when we're outside from now on." Billy was somewhat puzzled and was about to speak. Percival's deep voice sounded once more. "All right, I have other matters to attend to. I'll have Gary take you back." With that, Percival left without even turning his head. Billy wanted to say more, but Percival had already vanished from sight. Watching Percival's receding figure in the distance, Billy sighed, her eyes filled with desolation. Sterling Family Villa. Percival was preoccupied and somewhat absent-minded. During the day, Cornelia's sad expression kept floating in his mind. Percival looked up to see Ethel's photo placed before him, only, the photo seemed to be covered in a layer of dust. Suddenly, Percival seemed to have made up his mind and dialed his assistant's number. Percival frowned, his voice low. "Gary, help me prepare the divorce papers." After hanging up the phone, Percival took a deep breath. He had finally made this decision. During this time, Percival had thought a lot, but still couldn't understand what was truly in his heart, until just now, when I saw Ethel's photo on the table. Percival suddenly realized that he hadn't thought of Ethel for a very long time. Ethel's existence was special to Percival, and Percival's love for Ethel was profound. It's just that over these 3 years, Percival hadn't noticed it himself. In truth, Cornelia's companionship over these 3 years has already carved out a place in Percival's heart. Once upon a time, Percival only loved Ethel, and indeed only fancied Cornelia for her face that resembled Ethel's. But now, Percival realizes that his feelings for Cornelia have long since changed, though he knows not when it began. Perhaps it was the helpless sorrow of knowing Cornelia was carrying his child, or the unwillingness in his heart when Cornelia decided to sever all ties between them, or maybe the frustration and jealousy of seeing Cornelia walking with another man. Thinking of this, Percival no longer wanted to escape. Now, once these matters are settled, Percival can go find Cornelia. Sterling family conglomerate. Billy was holding the carefully prepared pineapple cakes, planning to talk to Percival properly again. Billy, though not understanding what had upset Percival this time. But it didn't matter. Billy had long grown accustomed to Percival's indifference, and this time, Billy no longer wanted to keep avoiding Percival like this. Some things really needed to be talked about face to face. In the office, Billy couldn't see Percival anywhere. Billy was about to ask. Suddenly, a phone rang. It was Percival's. Billy felt a surge of joy and quickly answered the call, her voice gentle. "Percival, I was just about to look for you. I made pineapple cakes for you." "Where are you?" On the other end of the line, Percival's calm voice responded. "I was just thinking of seeing you too. Wait there, I'll come find you." "Okay," Billy replied with a gentle smile on her face. After hanging up the phone, Billy couldn't suppress her smile any longer. She couldn't help but feel a little excited inside. So, she really waited for Percival. Did Percival accept her? At this thought, Billy was filled with anticipation and couldn't help but jump around happily. Suddenly, Billy accidentally knocked over Ethel's photo frame, scattering the photos. Billy quickly crouched down to pick it up. She knew Percival treasured Ethel's photo dearly, and if Percival saw this, he would surely be upset. Billy picked up the photo and carefully tried to place it back into the frame. Suddenly, Billy's gaze was drawn to a hospital report tucked inside the frame. Billy picked up the report, unable to suppress her curiosity. What could possibly make Percival worthy of being preserved in Ethel's photo frame? But when Billy clearly saw it, she froze in an instant. The report in front of her was a pregnancy ultrasound, and the name on it belonged to a woman called Cornelia. In an instant, Billy felt utterly bewildered, her heart racing uncontrollably. Faint memories surfaced in her mind of what that reporter had said during the engagement banquet, recalling that since their marriage, Percival had never once touched her, always claiming to be busy or saying he didn't want to disturb her, opting instead to rest at his private residence. Remembering that birthday night when Percival said he was working overtime at the company, yet Percival was nowhere to be found. Secretary Gary's hesitant mumbling, all of this, in an instant, flooded Billy's mind. At the thought of this, Billy's heart sank abruptly, body trembling slightly, barely able to stand. So, those rumors weren't baseless. Could all of this actually be true? Suddenly, a familiar voice broke Billy's train of thought. "Billy, I'm here. I have something to tell you." Billy slightly raised her eyes, meeting Percival's gaze directly. She saw Percival dressed in a formal suit, his expression still indifferent. Looking at the familiar figure before her, Billy only felt a slight blur in her vision. Noticing Billy's unstable emotions, Percival sensed the subtle tension in the air. Percival slowly stepped forward, but before Percival could speak, Billy directly flung the hospital report in front of Percival without hesitation. Looking at the familiar report in front of him, Percival flashed a hint of panic in his eyes. Billy stood frozen in front of Percival, eyes slightly red, voice somewhat hoarse. "Tell me, what's going on? Why was it stored in Ethel's photo frame?" Percival was momentarily stunned, his gaze evasive, almost afraid to meet Billy's eyes. Seeing Percival remain silent, Billy could no longer contain her emotions. She understood that Percival's silence had already confirmed her suspicions were correct. Billy's eyes turned bloodshot. her tears uncontrollable, her voice choked with sobs. "Percival, so, this child is yours, right? You really have another woman out there, don't you?" Looking at Percival, Billy could only feel that the man she had loved for so many years now seemed like a complete stranger. Billy forced a bitter smile, a wave of bitterness washing over her heart, her voice turning hoarse. "So after we got married, you always made excuses not to touch me. Was it because of her too?" Billy felt unwilling to accept it, her voice dropping to a low growl. "Percival, why?" After a long silence, Percival finally spoke slowly. Looking at Billy before him, Percival's eyes flashed with a trace of guilt, his voice low. "I'm sorry, I lied to you. What you said is indeed true." As he spoke, Percival produced the divorce agreement, his voice hoarse. "It's all my fault. I shouldn't have lied to you. I'll make up for what I owe you properly. Let's part on good terms." Staring at the divorce agreement in front of her, Billy couldn't help but feel somewhat amused, her voice hoarse. "Percival, you shouldn't have lied to me. I do like you, but I'm not the kind to cling desperately. I have my pride too." After saying this, Billy held back her tears and signed her name on the divorce agreement without hesitation. Billy turned her head away, not even wanting to glance at the man before her. At this moment, Billy felt nothing but heartbreak. Wiping the tears from the corner of her eyes, her gaze was icy, her voice choked with emotion. "Percival, I don't want your compensation. From now on, we have nothing to do with each other." With that, Billy threw down the box of pineapple cakes and walked away without looking back. Percival stared at the divorce agreement in front of him, frozen in place, lost in thought. 2 days later, at the company, Cornelia was busy working. Since Billy's press conference, Cornelia had completely stopped holding any illusions about Percival, and Cornelia had also decided that it was time to truly let go and move forward. Cornelia was so absorbed in her work that Cornelia didn't notice. Inside the office, a passionate discussion was taking place, and this discussion was about Cornelia. A long-haired woman glanced at Cornelia, speaking softly. "Hey, have you seen it, that news?" "Saw it. No idea who spilled the tea. Who would have thought?" Cornelia had this up her sleeve. A man nearby gave Cornelia a suggestive look, his tone mocking. The short-haired woman pursed her lips and murmured in agreement. "So, Percival really divorced Billy because of Cornelia?" The long-haired woman couldn't help but laugh, her tone somewhat nonchalant. "Yeah, when this scandal broke yesterday, people already went to surround Mr. Percival. At first, everyone thought it was just baseless rumors. But then when the news came out, someone actually dug up evidence that Mr. Percival used to meet frequently with a woman. Someone happened to take a photo, and the woman in the picture was Cornelia." The office was bustling with people, each with their own version of events. Cornelia could sense that the way everyone looked at her today was different from usual, but she couldn't figure out why. Suddenly, the supervisor walked in, slowly approached Cornelia, and looked up at Cornelia. His gaze carried a hint of disdain, his voice low. "Cornelia, starting tomorrow, you're fired." Cornelia was momentarily confused, unable to process what had just happened, but Cornelia wasn't the timid type. Being told out of the blue that she was being fired, Cornelia naturally refused to accept it. Cornelia stood up, her gaze unwavering and her tone firm. "Supervisor, if you're firing me, you owe me an explanation." The supervisor merely cast a disdainful glance at Cornelia, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "An explanation? Cornelia, this decision was made by the company. Just look at the news yourself." With that, the man left without looking back. Cornelia felt somewhat dazed, only to notice the people around her whispering and staring at her. Cornelia picked up her phone, and a piece of news suddenly pierced Cornelia's eyes. The Trevor family group's Percival has already divorced the Trevor family's eldest daughter Billy. And the reason seems to be because Percival kept a mistress outside. Cornelia glanced over. Beside the text was a somewhat blurry photo, but Cornelia still recognized herself in the photo. Cornelia was momentarily stunned. Listening to the murmurs around her, Cornelia couldn't help but feel flustered. How could this be? How could it be related to her? Suddenly, a phone rang. It was Victor. Cornelia answered the call, and the man's voice on the other end sounded concerned. "Cornelia, are you okay? That news?" Cornelia finally came to her senses, frowning slightly with a low voice. "I'm fine, Victor. Let's talk in person. I'll wait for you at the apartment." After hanging up the phone, Cornelia quickly gathered her things and went home. Inside the apartment, Cornelia was staring blankly at the news. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Cornelia opened it. There stood Victor with a worried expression, speaking in a hurried tone. "Cornelia, what on earth is going on? Is that you in the photo?" Cornelia remained silent, only giving a slight nod. After a moment of silence, Cornelia took a deep breath. She raised her eyes to look at Victor, her voice low. Victor. Let me tell you about what I've been through these past 3 years today. Victor nodded. After a long pause, Cornelia finally managed to briefly describe the events of the past 3 years. Victor listened attentively, his eyes filled with heartache. It turns out that over these past 3 years, Cornelia has not been happy. Even during Cornelia's most vulnerable moments when she needed support the most, he wasn't by her side. At this thought, Victor felt even more frustrated and filled with self-reproach. Cornelia seemed to recall those sorrows again, her eyes brimming with desolation. Victor gently patted Cornelia's shoulder, his eyes filled with compassion, his voice tender. Cornelia, what do you plan to do after that? Cornelia remained silent for a while before speaking slowly. Victor, I want to leave this place, move to another city. Victor didn't hesitate for a moment, his tone resolute. Okay, I'll go with you. Cornelia smiled, her tone relaxed. I'm fine, all that is in the past now, and I truly intend to let it go. Victor just smiled gently, his voice tender. I know, but I want to stay with you. Don't forget, you still owe me a debt. Don't even think about ditching me. Cornelia understood Victor's meaning and couldn't help but laugh, no longer refusing. Suddenly, Cornelia's phone lit up with a text message from an unknown number. Cornelia glanced over, but her gaze was drawn to the name signed at the end of the message. Cornelia, let's meet up. Don't worry, I won't cause any trouble. I just want to talk. Billy. Seeing Cornelia looking a bit off, Victor showed some concern. What's wrong? Cornelia turned her phone around. Victor glanced at it, somewhat puzzled, his voice low. Cornelia, will you meet them then? Cornelia pondered for a moment, her voice calm. It's fine, let's meet. Seeing Cornelia had made her decision, Victor asked no further. Then I'll accompany you. Victor frowned slightly, clearly still uneasy about the current situation. Cornelia patted Victor on the shoulder, her voice gentle. Victor, it's okay, I can manage alone. Victor didn't say more, just added, if you have any problems, come to me. Cornelia smiled and nodded, although regarding Billy's invitation, Cornelia was also somewhat puzzled, but Cornelia still wanted to see Billy. The cafe. Cornelia and Billy sat facing each other. Cornelia glanced around, pulling down the brim of her hat, trying to conceal her appearance as much as possible. After all, the current Cornelia isn't quite suitable to appear in the public eye. Billy took a sip of coffee, her voice calm. It's fine. Take off your hat. I deliberately chose a less crowded place. No one will recognize you. Cornelia nodded, glanced around, and only then felt at ease to remove her hat. Billy looked at Cornelia before her, speaking softly. You really do resemble her. No wonder, no matter what I do, I still can't catch his eye. Cornelia shook her head, letting out a bitter laugh, her voice low. Miss, Billy is joking. The only reason Mr. Percival sought me out is because I resemble Miss Ethel. There are no other feelings involved. Billy shook her head and couldn't help but laugh. At the press conference that day, that reporter was you, wasn't it? I didn't get a good look at the time, but now I realize it wasn't my imagination. After you left, Percival's gaze at you was far from simple. Hearing this, Cornelia's heart skipped a beat, barely able to believe it. Cornelia slightly raised her eyes, her tone tinged with apology. Mrs. Billy, I had no intention of bothering Mr. Percival. I don't know the specifics, but I truly didn't mean to disturb you. For me, these matters are already in the past. Cornelia, although she didn't fully understand the details of the matter, she had already decided to let it go, regardless of Percival and Billy's relationship. She didn't want Percival and Billy to divorce because of her. Hearing this, Billy smiled faintly, her voice calm. I know, I'm not an unreasonable person. In the end, this matter is because of Percival. He lied to me. He couldn't see himself clearly. Billy's eyes were slightly red, yet her words remained gentle. I just came today to see you alone and have a casual chat. As for the matters between you two, they no longer have anything to do with me. After a moment of silence, Billy's voice sounded again. As for the news, I will step forward to clarify that it was an amicable separation due to personal reasons, unrelated to anyone else. With that, Billy waved and got up to leave. Cornelia was about to thank her, but Billy had already walked away. Watching Billy's retreating figure, Cornelia smiled, feeling somewhat drawn to Billy's charm. In Billy, Cornelia seemed to see a reflection of herself. On the way back, Cornelia pondered deeply, yet her mind kept replaying Billy's words from earlier. What did Billy mean earlier when she said Percival's feelings for her were different? Suddenly, her phone lit up with a text message from Percival. Cornelia, let's meet one more time. I have something very important to tell you. Cornelia was momentarily stunned, and then, Percival's phone call came through. Cornelia was momentarily dazed and didn't answer in time. Suddenly, a strong beam of headlights shone over, making Cornelia squint her eyes. Bang! In an instant, Cornelia felt her body become weightless. Her vision turned pitch black as she sank into a deep slumber. In the hospital, Victor and Percival were anxiously waiting outside the ward. The call made earlier, Cornelia had not answered, which made Percival very anxious. A sense of unease always filled his heart. Little did he expect that soon after, he would receive Cornelia's return call. The phone call brought devastating news from the hospital. Upon learning Cornelia was in critical condition after a car accident, Percival felt his heart sink instantly. He dashed toward the hospital like a madman. Staring at the illuminated surgery light, Percival was filled with unease. At this moment, Percival could only pray incessantly, hoping that Cornelia would be safe and sound. Victor also turned deathly pale, his body trembling uncontrollably. A long moment passed. The lights in the operating room finally went out. Percival hurried forward, gripping the doctor's hand tightly, his lips trembling. "How is she, doctor? Is she all right?" The doctor gently patted Percival, speaking in a kind voice. "It's okay. The critical period has passed, but the patient is severely injured. Whether they wake up or not is up to them now." Hearing this, Percival and Victor finally let out a sigh of relief. Shortly after, Cornelia was slowly wheeled out of the operating room. Looking at Cornelia on the hospital bed, Percival was filled with heartache, unable to hold back his tears any longer. He had come to his senses too late. 3 months later, Percival and Victor took turns caring for Cornelia. Although displeased, Percival understood, at this moment, he had no right or identity to make Victor leave. Thus, the two reached an agreement. Wait for Cornelia to wake up. Let Cornelia make her own choice. No matter who Cornelia chooses, the other person must respect Cornelia's decision. Percival gazed at the unconscious Cornelia on the hospital bed. His heart ached endlessly. Percival tightly held Cornelia's hands. Scalding tears fell onto Cornelia's hand. Percival's eyes were bloodshot, his voice choked with emotion. "Cornelia, please wake up soon. I still have things to tell you." Percival was filled with regret, his voice hoarse. "Cornelia, I love you. Can you give me another chance?" But at this moment, Cornelia could not give any response. Looking at the Cornelia before him, Percival could do nothing else now. All he could do was take good care of Cornelia, waiting for Cornelia to wake up. No matter how long it took, Percival would never give up. For the past 3 years, Cornelia had waited for him far too long. Now it was Percival's turn to wait for her. This time, Percival no longer wanted to escape. Waiting for Cornelia to wake up, Percival would tell Cornelia everything in his heart. As for whether Cornelia would forgive him or give him another chance, whether she would choose him again, Percival, it doesn't matter anymore. All he wants now is for Cornelia to be safe. Late at night, Percival held Cornelia's hand, and the exhausted him soon fell asleep. In the dream, Percival seemed to dream of Ethel there. Ethel looked exactly as she did in his memories. "Percival, forget me and move forward. She's wonderful. This time, don't let her slip away again." Percival gazed at Ethel, unable to hold back his tears. In an instant, Percival jolted awake. He looked at Cornelia before him and wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Suddenly, Cornelia's hand twitched slightly. Percival tightly grasped Cornelia's hand, his voice trembling with emotion. "Cornelia, I'm here. It's Percival. Wake up." Cornelia seemed to regain some consciousness. Slowly opening her eyes, her voice faint. "Percival, is that you?" Percival gently stroked Cornelia's cheek, his hand trembling uncontrollably, his voice hoarse. "It's me, Cornelia. Percival has always been here." Percival looked at Cornelia with a smile, unable to hold back his tears any longer. This time, he must not let go again.